Welcome to the shadowy depths of the forest where darkness reigns and secrets lurk behind every twisted tree. I'm your guide into the unknown, ready to lead you through tales that will chill you to the bone. But before we venture deeper, tell me, what city are you watching from? Leave a comment below and let me know where the fear is spreading tonight. If you dare to join our community of brave souls, hit that subscribe button now. And don't forget to leave a like if you want more terrifying tales from the deep woods. Now let me take you to a place where the branches reach out like gnarled fingers and the wind whispers warnings through decaying leaves. Our story begins on a moonless night, when a group of friends decided to test their courage by camping in the heart of these cursed woods. Little did they know, something ancient and hungry was waiting for them. The dense Adirondack forest loomed around me, an impenetrable wall of ancient pines and gnarled oaks. I'd been hiking for hours, the weight of my backpack digging into my shoulders, each step becoming more laborious than the last. The trail had long since disappeared, swallowed by the encroaching wilderness. Just a little further, I muttered to myself, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. As I pushed through a tangle of undergrowth, I stumbled into a small clearing. At its center stood an enormous oak tree, its trunk twisted and bulging in unnatural ways. Something about it made my skin crawl, a feeling of wrongness that I couldn't quite place. I approached cautiously, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain. "What happened to you?" I whispered, running my hand over the gnarled bark. My fingers caught on a deep crevice and I peered closer. There, nestled within the hollow of the tree, was a book. My heart raced as I reached in, half expecting something to grab my hand. Instead, my fingers closed around weathered leather. With a gentle tug, I extracted an ancient journal, its cover cracked and faded with age. "This can't be real," I breathed, turning the delicate object over in my hands. The leather was soft, almost greasy to the touch, and a musty odor wafted from its pages. How long had it been hidden away in this lonely tree? I glanced around the clearing, suddenly feeling exposed. The shadows seemed to lengthen, reaching toward me with grasping fingers. A chill wind whispered through the leaves, carrying what sounded like distant, mocking laughter. "Get a grip, Sam," I chided myself. "It's just an old book." But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. This was more than just a forgotten relic. The journal pulsed with a subtle energy, a life of its own that I could feel thrumming against my palms. With trembling hands, I opened the cover. The first page was blank, save for a single line of spidery text. "To you who reads these words, know that your fate is sealed." A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I should have stopped there, should have shoved the journal back into its wooden prison and run. But an irresistible compulsion drove me to turn the page, and that's when my world shattered. The hiker stumbles into the clearing, his pack heavy on his shoulders. I read aloud, my voice shaking. He approaches the ancient oak, drawn by a power he doesn't understand. I dropped the book as if it had burned me, staggering back. "No," I gasped. "It's not possible." But there it was, in faded ink on yellowed paper, an exact description of what I had just done, written long before I'd ever set foot in these woods. Against my better judgment, I picked up the journal again and continued reading. Every step I had taken, every thought that had flitted through my mind since entering the forest, it was all there, recorded in meticulous detail. "This is insane," I muttered, flipping through the pages with increasing desperation. "How can it know?" The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing. As darkness crept in, the words on the page seemed to writhe and dance, taunting me with their impossible knowledge. I slammed the book shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's just a coincidence," I told myself, but the words rang hollow in the gathering gloom. The tree loomed over me, its twisted form now unmistakably sinister. Had its branches always reached out like grasping claws, I could have sworn I saw faces in the gnarled bark, contorted in silent screams. "I need to get out of here," I said, shoving the journal into my backpack. As much as I wanted to leave it behind, I knew I couldn't. Whatever dark secret this book held, it was now inexorably linked to my fate. As I turned to leave the clearing, a voice whispered on the wind, so faint I almost missed it. "Welcome to the cycle, Sam. We've been waiting for you." I broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush with reckless abandon. But no matter how far or fast I fled, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer the author of my own story. With each step, the weight of the journal pressed against my back, a constant reminder that something ancient and malevolent had its sights set on me. And as night fell over the Adirondacks, I realized with growing horror that my nightmare was only beginning. The campfire flickered weakly, casting dancing shadows across the small clearing where I'd decided to make camp for the night. My hands shook as I held the journal close to my face, straining to read its faded script in the dim light. With each page I turned, the cold tendrils of dread tightened around my heart. "This can't be happening," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. Yet there it was in black and white, every detail of my journey laid out with impossible precision. I read aloud, my voice trembling. The hiker pauses to catch his breath, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He reaches for the water bottle in the side pocket of his pack, the blue one with the dent near the top from when he dropped it last summer. My eyes widened in disbelief. I slowly pulled out my water bottle, blue, with the exact dent described. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "Lucky guess," I said to myself, trying to quell the rising panic. But as I continued reading, the lucky guesses piled up with frightening rapidity. The journal described the contents of my backpack in meticulous detail, right down to the lucky pebble I'd picked up on a beach in Maine years ago and had forgotten was tucked in a small pocket. It knew about the blister forming on my left heel, the one I hadn't even noticed yet. But most terrifyingly, it knew my thoughts. "Sam considers turning back," I read, my voice barely audible over the crackling fire. The strange journal has him rattled, but curiosity overpowers his fear. He wonders if he's losing his mind. I slammed the book shut, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "How?" I demanded of the silent forest. "How can you know what I'm thinking?" Only the wind answered, rustling through the leaves with what sounded like mocking laughter. With shaking hands, I opened the journal again, flipping to a random page near the middle. My blood ran cold as I read. He thinks about Sarah, wondering if he should have told her where he was going. The guilt of their last argument weighs heavily on him. "Stop it," I shouted, throwing the book to the ground. Sarah's face flashed in my mind, her hurt expression as I'd stormed out of our apartment days ago. I hadn't told anyone about this trip, a spontaneous decision born of anger and frustration. How could this ancient tome know about a fight that had happened just last week? I paced around the campfire, running my hands through my hair. "This is impossible," I muttered. "I'm dreaming. I have to be dreaming." But the chill night air on my skin, the scent of pine and wood smoke, it all felt too real to be a dream. I picked up the journal again, unable to resist its siren call. "Sam paces, 5 steps in each direction," I read. "He tugs at his hair, a nervous habit from childhood. He tries to convince himself it's all a dream, but deep down he knows the truth." "Shut up," I yelled, hurling the book into the darkness beyond the fire's glow. For a moment, blessed silence fell over the camp. But then, impossibly, I heard the soft thud of the journal landing right behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. There it lay, open to a new page. With trembling fingers, I picked it up once more. He throws the book away, but it always returns. The journal cannot be abandoned, for it is now as much a part of Sam as his own shadow. A sob escaped my throat. I sank to my knees, clutching the cursed book to my chest. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. As if in response, The pages began to turn on their own, settling on a passage near the end. The handwriting here was different, jagged, desperate scrawls that dug into the paper. "I write this as a warning to myself, to you, to us," it read. "We are caught in a loop, a curse that spans centuries. Each of us finds the journal, each of us lives out its prophecies, and each of us fails to break the cycle." My mind reeled, trying to grasp the implications. A time loop? A curse? It was too fantastic to believe, and yet the evidence was literally in my hands. "There has to be a way out," I said, a hint of determination creeping into my voice. I refuse to accept that I'm just following some predestined script. But even as I spoke the words, I saw them appear on the page before me, the ink still wet and glistening in the firelight. I slammed the journal shut once more, but I could feel its pull, the weight of its knowledge pressing down on me. As I huddled by the dying fire, I realized that my simple hiking trip had turned into something far more sinister, a battle for my very fate, against an enemy I couldn't begin to understand. The night grew deeper, and with it my sense of isolation and dread. Whatever force was at work here, it knew me better than I knew myself. And as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer the author of my own story, but merely a character dancing to the tune of some malevolent puppeteer. The morning sun filtered through the canopy, but it brought no warmth to my chilled bones. I hadn't slept, spending the night in a haze of paranoia, jumping at every snapping twig and rustling leaf. The journal lay beside me, its presence a constant malevolent weight. "It's all just a coincidence," I muttered, running my hands over my face. The stubble reminded me I'd been out here longer than I'd planned. There has to be a logical explanation. I grabbed my backpack, determined to hike out and leave this nightmare behind. But as I stood, a piece of paper fluttered from between the pages of the journal. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It was a map, yellowed with age, showing the very trail I'd been following. And there, marked in faded red ink, was my exact location. "No," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "This isn't possible." I shoved the map into my pocket and started walking, my pace quick and uneven. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching out like gnarled fingers trying to hold me back. "It's just an old map," I said aloud, trying to convince myself. "Someone else must have hiked here before. That's all it is." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they rang hollow. The map hadn't just shown the trail. It had pinpointed the very clearing where I'd camped, a spot I'd chosen on a whim. As I hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Eyes seemed to peer from every shadow, and the wind carried whispers I couldn't quite make out. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Get a grip, Sam," I chided myself. "You're letting your imagination run wild." I paused at a stream to refill my water bottle, the cool liquid a momentary balm to my frayed nerves. As I straightened up, something caught my eye, a flash of white against the dark forest floor. My heart sank as I approached. It was a page torn from the journal, pinned under a rock. With shaking hands, I picked it up and read, "He tries to flee, to outrun fate itself. But the forest knows, the trees remember. Every step forward is a step already written." "This isn't real," I shouted, my voice echoing through the silent woods. "I'm not following some script." But even as I spoke, I felt the weight of the journal in my backpack, knew without looking that those very words would be appearing on its pages at this very moment. I crumpled the paper and threw it into the stream, watching as it was carried away by the current. For a moment I felt a sense of defiance, of control regained. Then I heard it, a whisper so faint I almost missed it. "Oh, Sam, when will you learn? You can't change what's already written." I spun around, heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out, but only silence answered. Panic rising, I broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush with reckless abandon. Branches whipped at my face. Roots seemed to rise up to trip me, but I pressed on, desperate to escape. After what felt like hours, I burst out of the tree line into a small meadow. Gasping for breath, I fell to my knees, the tall grass tickling my face. "This can't be happening," I panted, squeezing my eyes shut. "It's not real. It's not real." But when I opened my eyes, reality came crashing down once more. There, standing in the center of the meadow, was the twisted oak tree where I'd first found the journal. "No," I whispered, disbelief warring with dawning horror. "I've been walking for hours. I can't be back here." With leaden steps, I approached the tree. Its gnarled bark seemed to twist and writhe, forming faces that leered at me in silent mockery. And there, nestled in the hollow where I'd first discovered it, was the journal. My hands shook violently as I reached for it. The leather cover felt warm, almost alive beneath my fingers. I opened it, already knowing what I would find. "He returns to where it all began," I read aloud, my voice barely a whisper. The cycle continues, unbroken. A sob caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to rage against the impossible fate that seemed to be closing in around me. But instead I sank to the ground, cradling the journal in my lap. "Please," I whispered to the uncaring forest. "I don't want this. I just want to go home." But home felt like a distant dream now, fading with each passing moment. The journal's pages rustled in a non-existent breeze, and I knew without looking that more of my story, my predetermined path, was being written. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the meadow, I finally accepted the truth I'd been running from. This was no coincidence, no trick of an overactive imagination. Something ancient and powerful had ensnared me, and I was dancing to its tune whether I wanted to or not. With a heavy heart, I opened the journal once more, ready to read the next chapter of my inescapable fate. The forest closed in around me, a silent witness to my surrender, as I prepared to face whatever horrors lay ahead on the pages before me. As night fell, I huddled by a small fire, the journal open on my lap. My eyes burned from exhaustion and unshed tears, but I couldn't stop reading. The more I learned, the more horrifying my situation became. In the year 1692, I read aloud, my voice barely a whisper, a witch named Abigail Thorne was hunted through these very woods. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night sky. I could almost imagine I saw faces in the flames, contorted in anguish. Abigail was no evildoer, the journal continued. She was a healer, a protector of the forest. But fear and ignorance turned the townspeople against her. I turned the page, my fingers trembling. As the mob closed in, Abigail sought refuge in an ancient oak. With her dying breath, she cast a curse upon the land and all who would enter it. A chill wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing my fire. I yelped, scrambling to relight it, my heart pounding in my chest. Time itself bends to her will, I read by the light of my flickering matches. Those who enter her domain are doomed to relive the same fate again and again, until the curse is broken. "This is insane," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "Witches, curses, it can't be real." But even as I spoke, I knew in my heart it was true. The journal's impossibly accurate predictions, the way I kept circling back to the same places, it all pointed to something beyond natural explanation. As if in response to my thoughts, the pages of the journal began to turn on their own, settling on a new section. The handwriting here was different, jagged, desperate scrawls that dug into the paper. "I write this as a warning to myself, to you, to us," it read. "We are all one and the same. Travelers caught in Abigail's web. I've lived this loop 100 times, 1,000. Each time I think I'll be the one to break free. Each time I fail." My breath caught in my throat. "Who are you?" I whispered to the unknown writer. The wind picked up, whispering through the trees. For a moment, I could have sworn I heard a voice carried on the breeze. "I am you, Sam. I am all of us." I slammed the journal shut, my heart racing. "This isn't happening," I said, my voice rising in panic. "I'm not part of some centuries-old curse. I'm just a hiker who got lost." But even as I spoke, the trees around me seemed to lean in, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The darkness between them deepened, and I could have sworn I saw movement, fleeting shadows darting just out of sight. "Abigail?" I called out, immediately feeling foolish. "If you're real, if you can hear me, please, I'm not your enemy." The forest fell silent, an unnatural hush descending over the clearing. Then, slowly, the branches of the trees began to twist and writhe. Before my disbelieving eyes, they formed a face, ancient, lined with sorrow and rage. "Fool!" a voice boomed, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "They all say that. They all plead innocence, but you are here in my domain, and so you must pay the price." I scrambled backward, nearly falling into the remnants of my fire. "Please," I begged. "I didn't know. I don't want to be part of this cycle." The face in the trees twisted into a cruel smile. "It matters not what you want. The curse must be fed. You will relive your fate again and again until you find a way to break it, or until your soul withers and joins the others in eternal torment." Tears streamed down my face as the full weight of my situation crashed down upon me. "How?" I cried. "How do I break the curse?" But the face was already fading, the branches returning to their natural state. The voice, when it came again, was faint, carried on the night wind. "That, lost one, you must discover for yourself. But know this, every attempt before you has failed. What makes you think you'll be any different?" As silence fell once more, I collapsed to the ground, my body racked with sobs. The journal lay beside me, its pages fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. I knew without looking that it was writing my story, documenting my despair for the next poor soul who would find themselves caught in this nightmare. Hours passed, or perhaps it was minutes. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. When I finally raised my head, I saw the first gray light of dawn peeking through the trees. With a heavy heart, I reached for the journal once more. The cycle continues. I read, my voice hoarse from crying. Another day dawns, another chance to break free, or to sink deeper into the curse's embrace. I stood on shaky legs, shouldering my pack. The journal's weight seemed to have doubled overnight, a constant reminder of the supernatural burden I now carried. As I set off into the misty morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching my every move, waiting to see if I would be the one to finally break Abigail's curse, or if I, like countless others before me, would succumb to the endless cycle of torment that awaited in these cursed Adirondack woods. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. I'd been hiking for hours, fueled by a desperate need to find a way out of this nightmare. The journal weighed heavily in my pack, its presence a constant reminder of the ticking clock. I pulled it out once more, flipping to the final pages with trembling hands. The writing here was different, frantic, almost illegible scrawls that dug into the paper. "The end approaches," I read aloud, my voice hoarse. "As the sun sets on the 7th day, the cycle reaches its crescendo. Fail to break the curse by then, and your fate is sealed for another loop." My heart raced. 7 days. How long had I been here already? The days had blurred together in a haze of fear and confusion. "I don't have much time," I muttered, scanning the pages for any clue, any hint of how to break free. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the trees, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the journal. "Time?" it cackled. "Oh, poor lost soul. Time has no meaning here." I spun around, searching for the source of the voice. "Who's there?" I called out. "Show yourself." The branches of a nearby oak began to twist and writhe, forming the semblance of a face. It was Abigail, the witch whose curse had trapped me here. "You seek to break my curse?" she asked, her voice like rustling leaves. "Many have tried. All have failed." I stood my ground, though my legs shook beneath me. "I won't fail," I said, trying to inject confidence into my voice. "I'll find a way out." Abigail's laughter shook the forest. "Such bravado, but tell me, lost one, do you even know what day it is in your cycle?" I faltered, realizing with growing horror that I had no idea. How long had I been trapped here? That's what I thought, Abigail sneered. You race against a clock you cannot see, towards a finish line ever out of reach. There has to be a way, I insisted, leafing through the journal frantically. The others who came before me, they must have left clues. Oh yes, Abigail said, her tone mockingly sweet. Read on, little one. See how close they came, only to fail at the final moment. With shaking hands, I read account after account of previous victims. Some had come tantalizingly close to breaking the curse, only to be undone by a moment's hesitation or a fatal misstep. You're running out of time, Abigail taunted. Can you feel it? The noose tightening, the walls closing in? I could. With each passing moment, a sense of dread grew stronger, a feeling of impending doom I couldn't shake. What do I need to do? I pleaded, looking up at the face in the trees. Please just tell me. But Abigail was already fading, her features melting back into ordinary bark. That's for you to discover, her voice whispered on the wind. If you can... Left alone once more, I sank to my knees, the weight of my task crushing down upon me. The journal fell open beside me, and my eyes were drawn to a passage I hadn't noticed before. The key lies in understanding, it read. Not just the curse, but yourself, your deepest fears, your greatest regrets. Face them, overcome them, and you might just break free. I pondered these words, my mind racing. What were my deepest fears? My greatest regrets? The argument with Sarah flashed through my mind, along with a lifetime of small mistakes and missed opportunities. With renewed determination, I stood up. I won't let you win, Abigail, I said to the silent forest. I'll face whatever you throw at me. As if in response, the trail ahead seemed to shimmer and twist. When it settled, I found myself staring at a familiar scene, the entrance to the woods where my journey had begun. No, I whispered, realizing with horror that I was back at the starting point. How much time had I lost? Was I doomed to repeat the cycle again? But then I noticed something different. Carved into a tree beside the trail was a message. The path changes. The destination remains the same. I approached cautiously, running my fingers over the rough bark. The carving was fresh, the wood still damp with sap. Had I done this in a previous loop? Or was it a message from another trapped soul? Either way, it was clear that simply retracing my steps wouldn't be enough. I needed to make different choices, face my fears head-on if I had any hope of breaking free. With a deep breath, I stepped onto the trail once more. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching out like grasping fingers. But this time, instead of running, I stood my ground. I'm not afraid of you, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. I'll face whatever you throw at me, Abigail, and I will break this curse. As I set off down the path, the journal in my pack seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. I didn't know how much time I had left, or what horrors awaited me in the depths of the cursed forest. But I was determined to fight with every ounce of strength I had left. The race against time had begun in earnest. With each step, I could feel the curse tightening its grip. But I also felt a glimmer of hope, a chance, however small, that I might be the one to finally break free from Abigail's twisted game. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, I pressed on. Whatever lay ahead, whatever nightmares I would face, I was ready. The end was coming one way or another, and I was determined to meet it on my own terms. The forest had become a maze of shadows and whispers, each path seeming to loop back on itself. I'd lost track of how many times I'd passed the same gnarled oak, its branches reaching out like accusing fingers. Time was running out, and I knew it. Think, Sam, I muttered to myself, pacing back and forth. There has to be a way to leave a message, something that will stick through the loops. I pulled out the journal once more, its pages now dog-eared and smudged from my constant reading. A passage caught my eye. The curse bends time, but the land remembers. What is written in blood and stone may endure. My heart raced. This was it. A chance to communicate with my future. Past, self. I scanned the forest floor, finally spotting a sharp rock. Without hesitation, I sliced my palm, wincing at the pain. Using my blood as ink, I began to write on a large, flat stone. Beware the witch. Break the cycle. Trust no one. As I finished, I heard a chilling laugh echo through the trees. Abigail's voice carried on the wind. Clever, clever. But do you really think you're the first to try this? I spun around, searching for the source of the voice. Show yourself, witch. The branches of a nearby tree twisted and writhed, forming the semblance of a face. Abigail's eyes, gleaming with malice, stared down at me. Oh, poor lost soul, she crooned. How many times have you left messages for yourself? How many times have you ignored them? Convinced you knew better? I stood my ground, though my legs shook beneath me. This time will be different. I'll break your curse. Abigail's laughter shook the leaves. You all say that. Yet here you are, still trapped. Her words stung, but I refused to let her see my doubt. Instead, I turned back to my task, searching for more surfaces to mark. I found a birch tree with smooth, white bark and began to carve into it with the sharp stone. The journal lies. Make your own path. My hand ached from gripping the stone, blood mixing with sap as I etched the words deep into the bark. But I couldn't stop. This might be my only chance to change the course of events. As I worked, I felt Abigail's presence watching me, an oppressive weight on my shoulders. But I pressed on, moving from tree to tree, rock to rock, leaving a trail of desperate messages. Sarah is the key. Face your fears at the hollow tree. The seventh day brings death or freedom. Each message was a gamble, a hope that some fragment of information might survive the reset and guide my future self towards breaking the curse. You're only prolonging your torment, Abigail's voice whispered. Each loop, you'll get closer, only to fail at the final moment. It's delicious agony. I gritted my teeth, ignoring her taunts as I carved another message. Abigail can be defeated. Find her weakness. Suddenly, the stone in my hand crumbled to dust. I looked up to see Abigail's face twisted in rage, the entire forest seeming to vibrate with her anger. Enough, she roared. You go too far, little one. Perhaps it's time I reminded you of your place in this game. The ground beneath my feet began to shift and buckle. Roots burst from the earth, wrapping around my ankles. I struggled to break free, but the more I fought, the tighter they gripped. You can't stop me, I gasped, even as the roots crept higher, ensnaring my legs. I'll keep fighting, keep leaving messages until I break free. Abigail's laughter turned cruel. Oh, you poor deluded soul. Don't you see? Your desperate measures are part of the cycle. Your defiance, your clever little messages, they're all part of my curse. As the roots reached my waist, a horrifying realization dawned on me. What if she was right? What if every attempt to break free was just another turn of the wheel, another predetermined step in this endless dance? But even as despair threatened to overwhelm me, I clung to a spark of hope. I might not be able to control the outcome, but I could control my choices in this moment. With the last of my strength, I reached for the journal, still tucked in my pack. Pulling out a pen, I scribbled one final message on its pages. Remember who you are. Your choices matter. As the roots enveloped me completely, pulling me down into the dark earth, I clutched the journal to my chest. The world faded to black, Abigail's mocking laughter the last thing I heard. I didn't know if I would remember any of this when the loop reset. I didn't know if my messages would survive or make any difference. But I had tried. I had fought back against the curse with every ounce of will I possessed. And as consciousness slipped away, I clung to that small victory. Whatever came next, whatever new horrors awaited me in the next cycle, I would face them knowing that I had not given up. The darkness took me, and the forest fell silent once more, waiting for the cycle to begin anew. The world swam into focus, trees materializing out of a hazy fog. I found myself standing at the edge of the forest, exactly where my nightmare had begun. But this time, something felt different. A sense of finality hung in the air, as if the very fabric of reality was stretched to its breaking point. "The seventh day," I whispered, the words tasting of fear and desperate hope. I pulled out the journal, its pages now so familiar I could recite them from memory. The final entry glared up at me, written in a shaky hand I recognized as my own. "This is it. The last chance. Break the curse or be lost forever." My heart raced as I stepped onto the trail. The forest seemed to hold its breath, watching, waiting. I noticed markings on the trees and rocks, my desperate messages from previous loops. Some were faded, barely legible, while others stood out in stark clarity. "Trust no one. The journal lies. Face your fears." I touched each message as I passed, trying to piece together the fragments of my fractured journey. The witch's laughter echoed in my mind, but I pushed it aside. I couldn't let her distract me now. As I delved deeper into the woods, the air grew thick and oppressive. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, taking on monstrous shapes before melting away. I gritted my teeth, pressing forward. "I know you're watching, Abigail," I called out. "Show yourself." The forest fell silent, an unnatural hush descending over everything. Then, slowly, the trees began to twist and writhe, forming a massive face that loomed over me. "So, the lost soul returns," Abigail's voice boomed, shaking leaves from the branches. "Have you come to admit defeat?" I stood my ground, though fear threatened to overwhelm me. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I've come to end this, to break your curse once and for all." Abigail's laughter shook the earth. "Bold words, little one. But do you even know how? How many times have you stood in this very spot, making the same declaration?" Doubt crept in, but I pushed it aside. "Maybe I have," I admitted, "but this time is different. I remember." The witch's eyes narrowed. "Remember what?" I pulled out the journal, holding it up like a shield. "Everything. Every loop, every failure, every lesson learned. I won't make the same mistakes again." For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross Abigail's wooden features, but it was quickly replaced by a cruel smile. "Memories fade, little one," she hissed, "and time has a way of repeating itself." The forest began to shift around me, reality bending and warping. I saw flashes of my previous attempts, running in terror, pleading with the witch, trying to outsmart the curse. Each time I failed. But as the visions swirled, I noticed something. In each loop there was a moment of choice, a split second where everything hung in the balance. And each time, fear had driven my decision. "No more," I whispered, closing my eyes and centering myself. When I opened them again, the forest had solidified. Abigail's face watched me, a mix of curiosity and malice in her gaze. "What will you do now, lost one?" she asked. "Run? Fight? Beg for mercy?" I took a deep breath, then did the last thing she expected. I sat down on the forest floor, crossing my legs and placing the journal in front of me. "None of those," I said calmly. "I'm going to break the cycle." Abigail's laughter rang out once more. "And how do you intend to do that?" "By understanding," I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "Not just the curse, but myself. My fears, my regrets, the choices that led me here." I opened the journal, not to read it, but to write. As my pen touched the paper, I felt a shift in the air, as if the very fabric of the curse was holding its breath. "What are you doing?" Abigail demanded, a note of uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Rewriting my story," I said, not looking up. "Not the one you've trapped me in, but my own. The truth of who I am, why I came to these woods, what I'm truly afraid of." As I wrote, pouring out my heart onto the pages, the forest around me began to change. The oppressive shadows retreated, and a soft light filtered through the leaves. "Stop this," Abigail roared, her face contorting in rage. "You cannot simply write your way out of my curse." But I didn't stop. I wrote about Sarah, about the fight that had driven me to these woods. I wrote about my fears of commitment, of failure, of being trapped by my own choices. And as I wrote, I felt the power of the curse weakening. "I understand now," I said, looking up at Abigail. "Your curse doesn't trap us in time. It traps us in our own fears and regrets. But once we face them, truly face them..." I stood, holding the journal out towards her. "We're free." A blinding light erupted from the pages, enveloping the entire forest. I heard Abigail's scream of rage and despair, felt the curse shatter like glass around me. When the light faded, I found myself standing at the edge of the forest once more. But this time, it was just a forest. Beautiful, wild, but no longer menacing. The journal in my hands was now just a simple notebook, filled with my own thoughts and revelations. As I turned to leave, I thought I heard a whisper on the wind, not Abigail's voice, but something older, wiser. "The cycle ends when you choose to end it." With a smile, I stepped out of the woods and onto the path that would lead me home. The curse was broken, the cycle ended. And while the memory of those harrowing days would stay with me, I walked away not as a victim, but as the author of my own story. As Sam's harrowing tale of breaking Abigail Thorne's curse draws to a close, we're reminded that the Adirondack forests harbor countless secrets, and not all stories find such liberating endings. Steel yourself for another dark descent, where the boundaries between reality and nightmare blur, and the price of curiosity may prove steeper than one could ever imagine. The small plane's engines whined as we descended through a thick blanket of clouds. My stomach lurched, a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I clutched my camera bag tightly as if it were a lifeline to sanity in this vast, untamed wilderness. "First time in Alaska?" The grizzled pilot's voice crackled through my headset. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He chuckled, a sound like gravel in a blender. "You picked one hell of a time to visit, miss. Aurora's supposed to be something special tonight." If only I knew then how terribly right he would be. The plane touched down with a jolt on the tiny airstrip, little more than a cleared patch of earth in the middle of nowhere. As the propellers wound down, an eerie silence descended. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through the pines. Just stillness. I stepped out onto the worn metal stairs, my boots clanging hollowly. The crisp air hit me like a slap, carrying the scent of pine and something else. Something older. My breath frosted in front of me as I surveyed the landscape. Miles of dark forest stretched in every direction, broken only by the jagged silhouettes of distant mountains. "Welcome to the last frontier," the pilot grunted, hefting my duffel bag onto the tarmac. "Your ride should be here soon. Watch yourself out there, miss. Nature don't care much for tourists." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "I'll be careful. Thanks for the smooth flight." He just grunted again and turned back to his plane. I was left alone on the edge of the wilderness, the weight of my camera gear suddenly feeling much heavier on my shoulder. As I waited for my ride to the lodge, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My eyes kept darting to the tree line, searching for what? I told myself it was just nerves, the natural apprehension of being in a strange place. But deep down, a primal part of me knew better. Something was off. A battered pickup truck rumbled into view, headlights cutting through the gathering gloom. A woman with weathered features and eyes like flint stepped out. Maria Vasquez. Her voice was as rough as the landscape around us. I nodded, extending my hand. "That's me. You must be Sarah from the lodge." She ignored my outstretched hand, instead grabbing my duffel bag and tossing it into the truck bed. "Get in. It's a long drive and you don't want to be out here after dark." As I climbed into the passenger seat, the chill in the air seemed to deepen. Sarah gunned the engine, and we lurched onto a dirt road that vanished into the forest. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the rattling of the old truck. I tried to make conversation. "So, have you lived here long?" Sarah's eyes never left the road. "All my life. It must be amazing seeing the northern lights whenever you want." Her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Some things aren't meant to be seen, Miss Vasquez." I blinked, taken aback by her tone. "What do you mean?" Sarah was quiet for so long I thought she hadn't heard me. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost a whisper. "The old people, the natives, they have stories. About the lights, about what they really are." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of stories?" She shook her head. "Forget I said anything. You're here to take your pretty pictures. Just be careful where you point that camera of yours. Some things don't like being captured." The rest of the drive passed in uneasy silence. As we wound deeper into the wilderness, the trees seemed to press closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Shadows danced at the edge of the headlights, taking on impossible shapes before melting back into darkness. By the time we reached the lodge, night had fully fallen. The sky was a vast, inky expanse, studded with more stars than I'd ever seen. Yet instead of beauty, I felt only a crushing sense of insignificance, of vulnerability. Sarah killed the engine, and for a moment we sat in total darkness. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Listen close, Miss Vasquez. When the lights come, don't look directly at them, don't try to follow them, and whatever you do, don't go out alone." Before I could respond, she was out of the truck, unloading my bag. I sat there for a moment, my heart pounding. What had I gotten myself into? As I finally stepped out of the truck, a flicker of green caught my eye. I looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. There, on the horizon, the first tendrils of the aurora were beginning to appear. Sarah's warning echoed in my mind, but I couldn't look away. The light seemed to pulse, to reach out across the sky. And as I stood there, mesmerized, I could have sworn I heard something. A vast, impossibly distant sound, like the creaking of massive joints long frozen in slumber. The cosmic horrors that awaited me were stirring. And I, in my foolish quest for the perfect photograph, had placed myself directly in their path. The lodge creaked and groaned around me as I paced the worn floorboards of my small room. Sleep eluded me, my mind racing with Sarah's cryptic warnings and the eerie silence that had descended upon the landscape. I checked my watch. 11:43 p.m. The aurora forecast had predicted peak activity around midnight. Unable to contain my restlessness any longer, I grabbed my camera bag and crept down the stairs. The common area was deserted, lit only by the dying embers in the stone fireplace. As I reached for the door handle, a voice startled me. "I thought I told you not to go out alone." I spun around to find Sarah emerging from the shadows, her eyes glinting in the low light. I just wanted to get set up early," I stammered. "To catch the first light." Sarah's face hardened. "You're not listening, girl. This isn't some pretty light show for tourists. There's something wrong out there tonight. I can feel it in my bones." I hesitated, my hand still on the door. "What do you mean, wrong?" She shook her head, lips pressed into a thin line. "I've lived here all my life, seen more auroras than I can count, but never have I felt this stillness before. It's like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting for something." A chill ran down my spine, but I steeled myself. I hadn't come all this way to cower in fear of local superstitions. "I appreciate your concern, Sarah, but I'll be fine. I'm just going to the ridge we passed on the way in. I won't be gone long." Sarah's shoulders sagged, as if a great weight had settled upon them. "On your own head be it then, but take this." She pressed a flashlight into my hand, along with what looked like a small canister. "Bear spray," she explained, "though I fear it won't do much good against what's out there tonight." Before I could question her further, She retreated back into the shadows. Unsettled, but undeterred, I stepped out into the night. The cold hit me like a physical force, stealing the breath from my lungs. But it wasn't just the temperature that made me shiver. The silence was oppressive, unnatural. No wind stirred the trees, no nocturnal creatures called out. It was as if the entire forest was cowering, hiding from something. I made my way to the ridge, my footsteps crunching far too loudly in the stillness. As I set up my tripod with trembling hands, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My eyes kept darting to the tree line, searching the shadows for... what? I couldn't say, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. "Get it together, Maria," I muttered to myself, fiddling with my camera settings. "It's just nerves. You've wanted this shot for years." As if in response to my words, a faint glow appeared on the horizon. My breath caught in my throat as the first ribbons of green light began to dance across the sky. Despite my unease, I couldn't help but marvel at the sight. This was what I had come for. I raised my camera, framing the shot carefully. But as I peered through the viewfinder, something changed. The lights began to move differently, no longer swirling in their usual patterns. They seemed to coalesce, to reach downward. Lowering my camera, I gazed up in mounting horror. The aurora was transforming before my eyes, stretching towards the earth in vast finger-like projections. Each spectral digit was miles long, composed of sickly, swirling light that hurt to look at directly. "This can't be real," I whispered, my voice sounding small and fragile in the face of this impossible sight. But it was real. Too real. As I stood there, paralyzed by terror and awe, I became aware of a sound. No, not a sound. A vibration. It thrummed through the earth, through my very bones, growing stronger with each passing moment. The trees began to sway, not from wind, but from the pulsing energy that radiated from those grasping, ethereal fingers. I wanted to run, to flee back to the relative safety of the lodge, but my feet seemed rooted to the ground, my body refusing to obey the screaming commands of my mind. All I could do was watch as the impossible unfolded before me. The fingers of light continued to stretch downward, reaching for the earth with terrible purpose. And as they descended, I began to perceive something beyond them, a vast and shadowy presence that lurked just out of sight. Whatever cosmic horror was using the aurora as its gateway, it was awakening, and it was hungry. A twig snapped behind me, breaking the spell. I whirled around, my heart pounding, to find Sarah standing at the edge of the clearing. Her face was ashen, eyes wide with terror as she gazed at the sky. "Oh, child," she breathed, her voice barely audible over the building vibration. "What have you done?" I opened my mouth to protest, to say that this couldn't possibly be my fault, but the words died in my throat. Because in that moment I felt it. An alien consciousness pressing against the fabric of reality, vast and ancient and utterly malevolent. And somehow, impossibly, I knew it was aware of me. That my presence, my foolish quest for the perfect photograph, had drawn its attention to our fragile world. Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip painfully tight. "We need to go. Now, before it's too late." As we turned to flee, the vibration reached a fever pitch. The spectral fingers plunged downward, piercing the earth with a sound like reality itself tearing apart. The ground buckled beneath our feet, and I stumbled, my camera clattering forgotten to the forest floor. The last thing I saw before Sarah dragged me into the trees was a shape beginning to emerge from the portal in the sky, a shape too vast, too alien for my mind to comprehend. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that this was only the beginning of the horror that was about to unfold. Sarah's iron grip on my arm was the only thing keeping me from collapsing as we stumbled through the dark forest. The earth trembled beneath our feet, each shudder sending waves of panic through my body. Behind us, that tear in reality pulsed with sickly light, casting our elongated shadows before us like grotesque puppets. "We can't outrun it," I gasped, my lungs burning. What is that thing?" Sarah's face was a mask of grim determination. Something that should have stayed sleeping. Something older than time itself. A deafening crack split the air, and we both stumbled to a halt. Ahead of us, the ground began to split, a chasm opening up like a gaping maw. We backpedaled, but everywhere I looked, the earth was fracturing, veins of that otherworldly light seeping through the cracks. There, Sarah pointed to a rocky outcropping. We need to get higher. We scrambled up the steep incline, loose stones skittering away under our feet. As we reached the top, I turned back to look at what we were fleeing, and my mind reeled at the sight. The aurora had fully transformed now. What were once beautiful, dancing lights had become a writhing mass of tentacles, each one miles long and composed of that same sickly, swirling energy. They reached down from a gaping hole in the sky, a portal to some unknowable dimension beyond our own. And through that hole, something was emerging. "Oh God," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the cacophony of shattering earth and alien vibrations. "What is that?" The thing defied description. It was vast beyond comprehension, a mass of undulating flesh and impossible geometries. Eyes, if they could be called eyes, opened across its surface, each one larger than a house, pupils dilating as they focused on our world. On us. Sarah grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at her instead of the horror unfolding before us. "Listen to me, Maria. We can't fight this thing. Not directly. But there might be a way to send it back." I blinked, struggling to process her words through the fog of terror clouding my mind. "Send it back? How?" "The old stories," Sarah said, her eyes darting nervously to the sky. "They speak of a ritual, a way to close the gateway when the stars align." A hysterical laugh bubbled up from my chest. "A ritual? Are you serious? That's a cosmic horror from beyond space and time, and you want to fight it with... What? Chanting and candles?" Sarah's expression hardened. "This isn't a joke, girl. Those stories have kept my people safe for generations. They're all we've got." Before I could respond, a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before tore through the air. It was a roar, but not one that could have come from any earthly creature. It resonated on a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing to block out the noise. When it finally subsided, I lowered my hands to find them slick with blood. Sarah was on her knees, her nose bleeding freely. "We're out of time," she croaked, struggling to her feet. "The entity is fully manifesting. If we don't act now, everything, everyone, will be consumed." I stared at her, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to curl up in a ball and wait for the end, but a smaller, braver part refused to give up without a fight. "Okay," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "What do we need to do?" Sarah's eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and determination. "We need to get back to the lodge. There's a chamber beneath it, older than the building itself. That's where we'll perform the ritual." I glanced back at the cosmic horror that was slowly but inexorably pulling itself into our reality. Its vast alien bulk now filled half the sky, blotting out the stars. Tentacles of aurora light lashed out, wrapping around mountains and tearing them from the earth. "And if this ritual doesn't work?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Sarah's smile was grim. "Then we die. But so does everyone else on this planet. At least we'll go down fighting." Another earth-shattering roar shook the very air around us. In its wake, I could hear a sound like tearing fabric, the very cosmos straining under the weight of this invading entity. "All right," I said, squaring my shoulders. "Lead the way." As we began our desperate trek back to the lodge, weaving through a landscape that grew more alien with each passing moment, I couldn't help but think back to my naive excitement just hours ago. How foolish I'd been, thinking I could capture the beauty of the aurora in a photograph. Now, I was in a race against time, the fate of the world hanging in the balance. The entity's countless eyes swept across the land, searching, and as one massive pupil dilated in our direction, I knew with chilling certainty that it had found us. We were nothing but ants to this cosmic being, but we were ants that knew how to sting, and for that, it would show no mercy. The lodge loomed before us, a dark silhouette against the writhing alien sky. What had once seemed quaint and rustic now felt like our last bastion of humanity in a world rapidly descending into cosmic madness. Sarah and I staggered up the steps, our lungs burning from the mad dash through the warping landscape. As we burst through the door, the other guests, a handful of tourists and researchers, turned to us with expressions of confusion and fear. They had been huddled around the fireplace, seeking comfort in its warm glow while the world outside defied comprehension. "What's happening out there?" a middle-aged man demanded, his voice trembling. "The ground keeps shaking and those lights—" I opened my mouth to respond, but found I had no words to adequately describe the horror we had witnessed. How could I explain that the aurora they had come to admire was now a gateway for an entity beyond human understanding? Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady despite the blood still trickling from her nose. "Listen carefully, all of you. What's happening outside is beyond anything you've ever encountered. We don't have much time to explain, but you need to trust us." A young woman clutched her partner's arm, eyes wide with terror. Are we going to die?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of our shared mortality. I felt the crushing responsibility of knowledge settle on my shoulders. These people had no idea of the cosmic horror unfolding just beyond these walls, of how close we all were to annihilation. "Not if we can help it," I said, surprising myself with the determination in my voice. "But we need your help." Sarah nodded, relief evident in her eyes at my support. "There's a chamber beneath this lodge, older than the building itself. We need to perform a ritual there, one that might send that thing back where it came from." Skeptical murmurs rippled through the group. The middle-aged man who had spoken earlier scoffed. "A ritual? You can't be serious. We need to call for help, get the authorities involved." "Look outside," I snapped, gesturing to the windows. The otherworldly light pulsed through the glass, casting alien shadows across the room. In the distance, we could see mountains floating, torn from the earth by impossibly long tendrils of aurora. Does that look like something the authorities can handle? By the time anyone could get here, it'll be too late. Not just for us, but for everyone. A heavy silence fell over the room as the gravity of our situation sank in. I could see the moment reality hit each person, the widening of eyes, the slackening of jaws, the pallor that crept across their faces. "What do you need us to do?" The young woman who had asked about dying earlier stepped forward, her voice shaky but determined. Sarah quickly began assigning tasks, gathering candles, drawing symbols, arranging stones in specific patterns. As the group dispersed to carry out their duties, I pulled her aside. "Sarah," I whispered, glancing nervously at the windows, "I need to know. What are our real chances here? Can this ritual actually work?" She met my gaze, and I saw the weight of generations in her eyes. "Honestly, I don't know. This ritual has been passed down through my family for centuries, but it's never been used. Not like this. We're dealing with something so far beyond our understanding." Her voice trailed off as another tremor shook the lodge. Outside, that impossible roar echoed across the landscape. Closer now. Too close. "But it's all we've got," I finished for her. She nodded grimly. As we made our way to the hidden entrance of the underground chamber, I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of my own insignificance. Just hours ago, I had been so focused on capturing the perfect photograph, on making my mark in the world of aurora photography. Now, faced with a cosmic entity that could snuff out our entire planet without a thought, those ambitions seemed laughably small. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was the grim reality we faced. We weren't just fighting for our lives, or even for our world. We were standing against the uncaring vastness of a universe filled with horrors beyond our comprehension. and we were hopelessly, terrifyingly outmatched. As we descended into the ancient chamber, the air grew thick with the scent of dust and forgotten rituals. The other guests followed, carrying their assigned items, fear and determination warring on their faces. "Whatever happens," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the cramped space, "remember this. We're the last line of defense, not just for ourselves, but for all of humanity. If we fail—" She didn't need to finish the thought. We all knew what was at stake. As another earth-shattering roar reverberated through the chamber, causing dust and small stones to rain down on us, I steeled myself for what was to come. The grim reality was this. We were about to confront a cosmic horror with nothing but an ancient ritual and our own desperate courage. The odds were impossibly stacked against us. But as I looked around at the faces of these strangers, united in this moment of crisis, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but in the face of the universe's darkest terrors, sometimes a flicker is all we have. And by God, we were going to make it count. The ancient chamber beneath the lodge was a claustrophobic space, its rough stone walls adorned with faded symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering candlelight. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning herbs and the metallic tang of fear. Sarah stood at the center of a complex pattern chalked onto the floor, her eyes closed in concentration as she recited words in a language I didn't recognize. I glanced nervously at my watch. 2:17 a.m. How long had we been down here? How much time did we have left? "Is it working?" The young woman who had volunteered earlier whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could answer, a violent tremor shook the chamber. Dust and small stones rained down from the ceiling. In the distance, muffled by layers of earth but still terrifyingly loud, we heard that otherworldly roar. Sarah's eyes snapped open. "It's not enough," she gasped. "The entity is too strong, too close. We need something more." "More what?" I demanded, fighting to keep the panic from my voice. "More candles? More chanting? What?" She shook her head, frustration evident in every line of her face. "I don't know. The ritual should be working, but it's like trying to dam a river with pebbles. We need a focus, something to channel the energy to give the ritual direction." The middle-aged man who had been skeptical earlier stepped forward. "What about that?" He pointed to my camera bag, which I had brought down in our haste to reach the chamber. I blinked in confusion. "My camera? How would that help?" Sarah's eyes lit up with a desperate hope. "Of course, you came here to capture the lights. Your camera, it's a bridge between our world and theirs. A lens to focus reality itself." It sounded insane. But in that moment, facing cosmic horrors and impossible odds, insanity seemed as good a bet as any. I quickly retrieved my camera, my hands shaking as I powered it on. "What do I do?" I asked, looking to Sarah for guidance. She gestured to a small opening in the chamber wall, barely more than a crack. "Point it there. Focus on the lights, on the entity. Capture its essence, and maybe we can trap it." As I raised the camera to my eye, another violent tremor shook the chamber. I heard screams from the other guests as larger chunks of ceiling began to fall. "We're running out of time," someone shouted. I took a deep breath, steadying my hands as best I could. Through the viewfinder, I could see a sliver of the outside world. The sky was a maelstrom of sickly light, the aurora now a writhing mass of tentacles reaching down to earth. And beyond that, I gasped as the full horror of the entity came into focus. It was vaster than I had imagined, a titanic bulk that filled the sky and defied description. Eyes the size of lakes blinked lazily across its surface, each one radiating an intelligence and malevolence that made my soul shrivel. "I see it," I whispered, my finger hovering over the shutter button. Sarah's chanting grew louder, more urgent. The symbols on the walls began to glow with an inner light, pulsing in time with her words. The air in the chamber grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin tingle and my hair stand on end. "Now, Maria," Sarah cried, "take the shot." I pressed the shutter, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The tremors stopped. The roaring ceased. Even the dust hanging in the air seemed suspended, caught between moments. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing apart, everything exploded into motion. A beam of intense light shot from my camera, through the crack in the wall and into the sky. I saw the entity recoil, its countless eyes widening in what could only be described as surprise. The chamber filled with a wind that howled with the voices of 1,000 tortured souls. I clung to my camera, feeling it grow hot in my hands as impossible energies coursed through it. Through the viewfinder, I watched in awe and terror as the entity began to collapse in on itself, drawn inexorably towards the lens of my camera. "It's working," I shouted over the cacophony. "It's actually working." But our victory was short-lived. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the earth, the entity fought back. I felt a pressure building in my head, an alien consciousness pressing against the barriers of my mind. "Don't let go," Sarah screamed, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "Whatever happens, don't let go of the camera." The pressure intensified. Blood began to trickle from my nose, my ears. The camera grew hotter, the plastic beginning to melt and deform in my grip. But still, I held on. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours that we stood there, locked in a cosmic tug-of-war with a being older than time itself. I was vaguely aware of the others in the chamber, huddled together, lending their strength to Sarah's chanting. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, when the pain and the pressure threatened to tear me apart, something shifted. The entity let out one final earth-shattering roar, and then it was gone, sucked into the lens of my camera like water down a drain. The silence that followed was deafening. My camera, now little more than a twisted lump of plastic and metal, slipped from my blistered hands and clattered to the floor. As the dust settled and the glow faded from the symbols on the walls, I looked around at the shell-shocked faces of my companions. We had done it. Against all odds, we had faced down a cosmic horror and survived. But as the adrenaline faded and the full weight of what we had experienced settled over us, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. We had won a battle, but the war had only just begun. The aftermath of our cosmic battle left us reeling. The underground chamber, once our sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. The air was thick with the acrid smell of ozone and something else, something alien and indescribable. We huddled together, a group of strangers bound by an experience that defied explanation. Sarah was the first to break the stunned silence. "We need to destroy that camera," she said, her voice hoarse from hours of chanting. I looked down at the twisted lump of plastic and metal in my hands, still warm to the touch. The thought of it containing the essence of that cosmic horror made my skin crawl. "How?" I asked. "It's not like we can just toss it in the trash." The middle-aged man who had been skeptical earlier, I'd learned his name was Robert, spoke up. "We could bury it, deep in the permafrost." Sarah shook her head vehemently. "No, it needs to be completely destroyed, obliterated. We can't risk that thing finding a way to escape." As if on cue, the camera in my hands pulsed with an otherworldly light. I dropped it with a yelp, watching in horror as it began to twitch and convulse on the ground. "It's trying to reconstitute itself," Sarah cried. "Quick, we need to contain it." The young couple, Emily and Jake, rushed forward with a metal box they'd found in a corner of the chamber. We managed to scoop the writhing camera into it, slamming the lid shut just as a tendril of sickly light began to emerge from the lens. "That won't hold it for long," Sarah said grimly. "We need a plan, and fast." I racked my brain, desperately searching for a solution. "What about the volcano?" I suggested. "There's an active one not far from here, isn't there?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "Kilauea. Yes, that might work. The heat of the magma could be enough to destroy it completely." Robert scoffed. "And how exactly do you propose we get there? In case you've forgotten, we're in the middle of nowhere, and I doubt the roads are in any condition for driving after what just happened." He had a point. The cosmic entity's manifestation had wreaked havoc on the landscape. For all we knew, the entire infrastructure of Alaska could be in ruins. Emily spoke up, her voice trembling but determined. My father's a bush pilot. He has a small plane stationed about 10 miles from here. If we can reach it... It's our best shot, I said, nodding. But we'll need to move fast. There's no telling how long that box will hold. As if to emphasize my point, the metal container shuddered violently, a keening wail emanating from within that set our teeth on edge. All right, Sarah said, taking charge. Emily, Jake, you two focus on getting us to that plane. Robert, you're with me. We'll gather any supplies we can find. Maria, you keep an eye on that box. If it shows any signs of breaking open, yell. We sprang into action, driven by a desperate energy. As the others rushed about, I sat next to the metal box, watching it warily. Every few minutes it would twitch or emit an unearthly glow from its seams. Each time my heart would race, wondering if this would be the moment it burst open, unleashing cosmic horrors once again. How are you holding up? Sarah asked, pausing in her supply gathering to check on me. I laughed hollowly. Oh, you know, just babysitting an eldritch abomination trapped in my camera, living the dream. She squeezed my shoulder sympathetically. You did good, Maria. Without you, we'd all be... She trailed off, unable to find words to describe the fate we'd narrowly avoided. I just hope it's enough, I murmured. What if we can't destroy it? What if it's already calling others like it? Sarah's expression hardened. Then we keep fighting. We've seen behind the veil now. We know what's out there. And as long as we're breathing, we don't stop trying to protect our world. Her words bolstered my resolve, but a nagging doubt still gnawed at me. We were so small, so insignificant in the face of these cosmic forces. How long could we really hope to stand against them? Emily's voice cut through my brooding thoughts. I've made contact with my dad. He's on his way with the plane. We need to move now if we're going to meet him. We gathered our meager supplies and prepared to leave the relative safety of the underground chamber. As Robert and Jake carefully lifted the metal box containing the camera, I couldn't help but feel we were carrying a ticking time bomb. Just before we ascended the stairs, Sarah pulled me aside. Maria, I need you to understand something, she said, her voice low and urgent. What we're about to do, it's dangerous. Not just physically, but spiritually. Carrying that thing to the volcano, being in its presence for so long, it might change us. Are you prepared for that? I swallowed hard, the full weight of our desperate plan settling on my shoulders. But as I looked around at the determined faces of my companions, I knew there was only one answer I could give. I'm ready, I said. Whatever it takes to end this. As we emerged from the chamber into a world forever changed by cosmic horrors, I silently prayed that our desperate measures would be enough. The fate of not just our lives, but perhaps our entire reality, hung in the balance, and we were the only ones who could tip the scales. The small bush plane groaned under the strain as we approached Kilauea. The once lush Hawaiian landscape below us was barely recognizable, warped and twisted by the cosmic entity's brief manifestation. Emily's father, a grizzled veteran pilot named Jack, had remained stoically silent throughout our frantic explanation and subsequent flight. But I could see the fear in his eyes as he surveyed the alien terrain. We're about 5 minutes out, Jack called over the roar of the engines. But I don't know if I can land this bird anywhere near the caldera. The ground looks wrong. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the horizon where an ominous glow pulsed in time with the squirming metal box at our feet. We'll have to get as close as we can and go the rest of the way on foot. The box shuddered violently, causing us all to flinch. A tendril of sickly light seeped through a seam, and I felt a pressure building in my head, an alien consciousness probing at the edges of my mind. It's getting stronger, I gasped, pressing my palms to my temples. We're running out of time. Robert, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since our departure, suddenly spoke up. Maybe we should reconsider this. That thing in there, it's powerful. Maybe we could use it, learn from it. No! Sarah and I shouted in unison. I turned to Robert, seeing a feverish light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. That thing isn't some scientific curiosity, Robert. It's a malevolent entity that would consume our entire world without a second thought. We can't risk it escaping. Jack's voice cut through the tension. Hang on. This is going to be rough. The plane lurched as we descended, the turbulent air buffeting us mercilessly. With a bone-jarring thud, we touched down on a stretch of relatively flat ground about a mile from the volcano's rim. As soon as the plane rolled to a stop, we burst into action. Sarah and I grabbed the metal box while Emily and Jake gathered our meager supplies. Robert hesitated for a moment, that strange light still gleaming in his eyes, before reluctantly joining us. Good luck, Jack called as we disembarked. I'll wait here as long as I can, but if things get hairy... We understand, Emily said, giving her father a quick hug. Thank you for everything, Dad. The trek to the volcano's rim was a nightmare. The ground beneath our feet seemed to shift and pulse, as if the very earth was alive and aware of our presence. Strange, phosphorescent growths sprouted in our wake, and the air was thick with an alien miasma that made breathing difficult. As we neared the caldera, the metal box grew increasingly agitated. It thrashed in our grip, the unearthly wailing from within growing louder with each step. We're close, Sarah panted, her arms straining under the box's weight. Just a little further. Suddenly, Robert lunged forward, trying to wrench the box from our grasp. No, we can't destroy it. Can't you feel its power? It could give us everything we've ever dreamed of. I stared at him in horror, realizing the entity had somehow gotten into his mind. Robert, snap out of it. This isn't you talking. As we struggled, the box slipped from our grasp, clattering to the ground. The impact sprung the lid open and a blinding light erupted from within. We all fell back, shielding our eyes. When the glare faded, I lowered my arm to see a sight that chilled me to my core. My camera, no longer a twisted wreck, hovered in the air before us. But it was changed, mutated into something grotesque and alien. Tendrils of light writhed from its lens, and I could feel the weight of countless alien eyes upon us. At last, a voice that was not a voice reverberated in our minds. Freedom. Sarah scrambled to her feet, her face a mask of determination. No, we won't let you destroy our world. She began to chant, the same ancient words she had used in the underground chamber. The air around us crackled with energy, and I felt a surge of hope. But the entity merely laughed, a sound that threatened to shatter our sanity. Your pitiful magics cannot contain me now, it boomed. I am free, and your world shall be my feast. In that moment, facing the full might of a cosmic horror, I made a decision. I knew what I had to do, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Sarah, I called, my voice steady despite my fear. The ritual. It needs a focus, right? A bridge between worlds. Her eyes widened as she realized what I was suggesting. Maria, no, you can't. But I was already moving, sprinting towards the hovering, mutated camera. Keep chanting, I yelled over my shoulder. No matter what happens, don't stop. As Sarah's voice rose in a desperate incantation, I threw myself at the entity. The moment I touched it, pain like nothing I'd ever experienced coursed through my body. I felt my consciousness being torn apart, stretched across dimensions I couldn't comprehend. But I held on, forcing myself to be the conduit, the bridge that Sarah's ritual needed. Through the haze of agony, I heard the entity's roar of fury, felt its desperate struggle against the forces now binding it. Time lost all meaning. I was aware of Sarah's voice, of the heat of the volcano, of the entity's alien presence all around and within me. And then, gradually, I felt it weakening, retreating. With one final reality-shaking howl, the entity was torn from our world. The mutated camera crumbled to ash in my hands and I collapsed to the ground, my body and mind pushed far beyond their limits. As consciousness faded, I heard my companions' voices, felt their hands lifting me, and I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that we had won. The cosmic horror was gone, banished back to whatever dark corner of the universe it had come from. But as the darkness claimed me, a small part of me wondered, for how long, and what other horrors might be out there waiting for their chance to break through. The battle was over, but I feared the war had only just begun. Now let's move on to the next dark story. Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe. I never saw it coming. One moment I was walking along the forest floor, cataloging limestone formations. The next, the earth gave way beneath my feet. As I plummeted into darkness, a scream tore from my throat, echoing off unseen walls. "Help! Somebody help me!" I cried out, knowing full well that no one was around to hear. The Apalachicola National Forest stretched for miles in every direction, and I had deliberately chosen a remote area for my research. Now that decision seemed like a fatal mistake. The fall seemed endless, my stomach lurching as I tumbled through the void. Time lost all meaning in the pitch blackness. Was I falling for seconds? Minutes? It felt like an eternity, each moment stretched into a lifetime of terror. As I fell, memories flashed before my eyes. My colleagues' warnings echoed in my mind. "Be careful out there, Ramirez," Dr. Chen had said, her face etched with concern. "That area's full of sinkholes. One wrong step and—" I had brushed off her worries with a confident smile. "Relax, Sarah. I've been studying these formations for years. If anyone can spot a sinkhole before it opens up, it's me." Oh, how wrong I had been. Now as I plummeted through the earth, I cursed my arrogance. Each second of free fall was an agonizing reminder of my hubris. The air grew damp and cool around me, carrying strange musty scents I couldn't identify. Hints of decay mingled with something else. Something alien and unsettling that made my skin crawl. Just when I thought I'd be falling forever, I hit something soft, yet unyielding. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs, leaving me gasping in the pitch black. Pain radiated through my body, and for a moment, I feared I had broken bones. Gingerly, I tested my limbs, relief washing over me as I realized nothing seemed to be fractured. But that relief was short-lived as the full weight of my situation crashed down upon me. I was trapped. Who knew how far underground, with no way to call for help? My phone, if it had survived the fall, would be useless this far below the surface. The darkness pressed in on all sides, so thick it felt almost tangible. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself, my voice sounding small and frightened in the vast darkness. "Assess the situation, use your training." I fumbled for my backpack, praying that my equipment had survived the fall. My fingers closed around the familiar shape of my flashlight, and I almost wept with relief. With trembling hands, I flicked it on, preparing myself for whatever nightmarish scene it might reveal. But the beam flickered weakly, barely penetrating the gloom before dying completely. "No, no, no," I muttered, shaking the flashlight desperately. "Come on, work." But it was no use. Whether damaged in the fall or simply drained, the flashlight was dead. I was truly alone in the dark. As panic threatened to overwhelm me, I forced myself to take deep breaths. "Think, Ramirez," I coached myself. "What do you know about this environment?" I ran through the geological facts in my mind, clinging to the familiar scientific knowledge like a lifeline. Sinkholes in this region typically formed in karst landscapes, where acidic groundwater dissolved the limestone bedrock. But this felt different. The surface beneath me was unlike any cave floor I had ever encountered. It yielded slightly under my weight, almost organic in texture. A chill ran down my spine as I considered the implications. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, an eerie glow began to penetrate the gloom. At first I thought I was imagining it, a hallucination born of fear and hope. But gradually, the light grew stronger, revealing shapes in the darkness that defied explanation. "What in God's name?" I breathed, my scientific mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The glow seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once, pulsing with a rhythm that felt unsettlingly like a heartbeat. It bathed everything in a sickly pale light that made me long for the darkness again. As the illumination grew stronger, I began to make out my surroundings. What I saw made me question my sanity. Towering structures loomed around me, their forms mimicking trees but composed of something other. They twisted and writhed, seeming to reach towards me with grasping, luminescent tendrils. The entire cavern thrummed with an otherworldly energy, each surface sheened with that same bioluminescent glow. As a geologist, I'd studied countless underground formations, but nothing in my experience could explain this. "This isn't possible," I muttered, my scientific mind rebelling against what my eyes were telling me. "It can't be real." But as I reached out to touch one of the glowing surfaces, it recoiled from my hand, sending a jolt of terror through me. This was no ordinary bioluminescence. This was something alive, something aware. With growing dread, I realized I'd discovered something unprecedented and terrifying. I had fallen not just into a sinkhole, but into another world entirely. A world that seemed to pulse with malevolent life, watching me with unseen eyes. As the full horror of my situation dawned on me, a sound rose unbidden from my throat, a scream of pure, primal terror that echoed through the cavern. The glowing structures seemed to pulse brighter in response, as if feeding off my fear. What hellish place had I stumbled into? And more importantly, how could I possibly hope to escape? The soft, pulsing light grew stronger, revealing a landscape that defied belief. I stood frozen, my mind reeling as it tried to process the alien world surrounding me. Towering structures loomed in every direction, their forms vaguely reminiscent of trees but composed of something other. They stretched upwards, disappearing into the shadows high above, their surfaces rippling with an inner light that pulsed in hypnotic patterns. "This can't be real," I whispered, my voice sounding small and insignificant in the vast cavern. "It has to be a hallucination. Maybe I hit my head in the fall." But even as I spoke the words, I knew they weren't true. The air around me was thick with an earthy, organic scent that was all too real. I could feel the slight give of the ground beneath my feet, like walking on living tissue. This was no dream or hallucination. It was a nightmare come to life. As a geologist, I'd spent my career studying the hidden worlds beneath the Earth's surface. I'd explored countless caves, marveled at crystal formations, and cataloged ancient rock strata, but nothing in my experience had prepared me for this. The entire cavern thrummed with an otherworldly energy, each surface sheened with that sickly bioluminescent glow. I fumbled for my sample kit, desperate for some semblance of scientific routine to ground me. With trembling hands, I scraped a small amount of the glowing substance into a vial. To my horror, it seemed to writhe within the glass as if trying to escape. "What are you?" I murmured, holding the vial up to my eyes. The substance inside pulsed in rhythm with the larger structures around me, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the implications. This wasn't just some strange mineral or new form of bioluminescent fungus. This was something far more complex and far more terrifying. As I explored further, the true scale of this subterranean realm became apparent. The cavern stretched on for what seemed like miles, its boundaries lost in the dim, pulsating light. Bizarre formations dotted the landscape, spiraling towers, undulating sheets of translucent material, and pools of glowing liquid that rippled with unseen currents. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting the decision as my voice echoed through the cavern. The pulsing light seemed to intensify in response, and I could have sworn I saw movement in the shadows. "Is anyone there?" Only silence answered, but it was a silence pregnant with possibility. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, observed by something beyond my comprehension. As I walked, I noticed patterns in the bioluminescent growth. It seemed to cluster more densely in certain areas, forming intricate networks that reminded me of neural pathways. The thought sent a shiver through me. Was I walking through the brain of some vast alien entity? Focus, Ramirez, I muttered to myself, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Observe. Analyze. There has to be a scientific explanation for all of this. I pulled out my notebook, jotting down observations with shaking hands. The act of recording data helped steady me, giving me a thin veneer of scientific detachment from the horrors surrounding me. Bioluminescent growth covers approximately 80% of visible surfaces, I dictated to myself as I wrote. Responds to sound and movement. Possible symbiotic relationship between different structures. No visible signs of traditional flora or fauna. As I spoke, a tendril of glowing material reached out towards me, as if curious about the sound of my voice. I jerked back, heart pounding. And apparently reactive to human presence, I added, a hysterical note creeping into my voice. The deeper I ventured into this underground world, the more questions arose. How had this ecosystem developed? What was its energy source, so far removed from the sun? And most pressingly, was there any way out? I thought of my colleagues back on the surface. Would they come looking for me when I didn't return? And if they did, would they too fall victim to this luminous labyrinth? I have to find a way to warn them, I said aloud, the sound of my voice providing small comfort in the alien silence. I have to get out of here. But as I spoke, the cavern seemed to pulse more intensely, the light growing brighter. It was as if the very walls were listening, reacting to my determination to escape. For the first time, I considered a chilling possibility. What if this place didn't want me to leave? I thought back to all the mysterious disappearances in these forests over the years. Hikers, researchers, even entire expeditions that had vanished without a trace. Had they too stumbled upon this hidden world? And if so, what had become of them? As if in answer to my unspoken question, I spotted something in the distance that made my blood run cold. Half embedded in one of the glowing structures was what appeared to be a human skull, its empty eye sockets filled with the same pulsing light that surrounded me. Oh God, I breathed, stumbling backward. What is this place? The cavern offered no answer, but the pulsing light seemed to grow more intense, more eager, and in that moment, I understood with terrifying clarity that I had discovered something unprecedented, and that discovery might very well cost me my life. With growing dread, I realized that this underground forest wasn't just a passive environment. It was alive, aware, and possibly hostile, and I was trapped within its glowing embrace. A scientist face to face with a mystery that defied all explanation, and possibly all hope of escape. As I explored this subterranean realm, the true nature of its illumination became horrifyingly clear. The light wasn't just a passive feature of the environment. It was alive. Tendrils of luminescence reached out, probing the air around me with an unsettling intelligence. "Stay back," I shouted, stumbling away from a particularly aggressive tendril. My voice echoed through the cavern, and the light pulsed in response as if excited by the sound. I pressed myself against what I hoped was a stable rock formation, trying to catch my breath and process what I was seeing. The entire cavern seemed to pulse with a single alien consciousness, and with mounting terror, I understood that it was aware of me. "This defies all known biology," I muttered, fumbling for my notebook. Even in the face of unimaginable horror, the scientist in me couldn't help but document. Bioluminescent organism exhibiting collective behavior and apparent responsiveness to external stimuli. As I scribbled my observations, a tendril of light snaked towards my notebook. I yanked it away just in time, watching in horrified fascination as the luminous appendage recoiled. "Are you curious?" I asked, hardly believing I was attempting to communicate with this alien entity. The light pulsed brighter for a moment, almost as if in affirmation. Swallowing hard, I held out my notebook at arm's length. "Here. This is how we record information. Do you understand the concept of information?" The tendrils of light approached more cautiously this time, gently probing the edges of the notebook. I felt a strange tingling sensation in my hand, as if the light was attempting to interface directly with my nervous system. Fascinating, I breathed, equal parts terrified and intrigued. You're not just responsive, you're actively trying to learn, aren't you? The cavern pulsed with a soft, almost warm glow that I took as confirmation. For a brief moment, my scientific curiosity overrode my fear. This was an unprecedented discovery, a form of life so alien and advanced it bordered on the miraculous. But then I remembered the skull I'd seen earlier, its empty sockets filled with that same living light, and my blood ran cold. What happened to the others? I asked, my voice trembling. The people who came before me? The warm glow vanished instantly, replaced by a harsh, pulsating rhythm that sent waves of dread washing over me. The tendrils of light withdrew, coalescing into a shape that made my heart stop. It was a human silhouette, composed entirely of that living light. It stood before me, featureless yet unmistakably mimicking human form. Then, to my horror, it began to dissolve, the light seeming to absorb into the surrounding structures. "Oh God," I whispered, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. "You absorbed them, didn't you? Their knowledge, their essence. You consumed it all." The cavern rumbled, the sound reminiscent of a great beast's hungry growl. The living light surged towards me with renewed vigor, no longer curious but ravenous. I ran, my feet pounding against the spongy cavern floor as tendrils of light grasped at my heels. My mind raced, trying to process the implications of what I'd discovered. This wasn't just a unique ecosystem. It was a predator, an intelligence that fed on information as much as organic matter. Each person who had fallen into its grasp had been consumed, their knowledge and experiences absorbed into this vast, luminous network. "Help!" I screamed, knowing it was futile, but unable to contain my terror. "Somebody, please!" My cries only seemed to excite the living light further. It pulsed and writhed around me, forming shapes that I recognized with growing horror. Tools, weapons, pieces of equipment. It was displaying its knowledge, showing me everything it had learned from its previous victims. I spotted a formation that looked vaguely like a cave opening and made a desperate dash for it. As I ran, I couldn't help but marvel at the awful efficiency of this organism. It was the ultimate evolution of a predator, one that not only consumed its prey but assimilated their knowledge and capabilities. "You won't take me," I panted, ducking into the narrow passageway. "I won't become part of your network." But even as I spoke, I felt tendrils of light brushing against my mind, probing, seeking entry. Images flashed before my eyes, geological formations, scientific theories, memories that weren't my own. The collective knowledge of all those the living light had consumed. I pressed my hands to my head, trying to block out the invasion. "Get out of my mind." The onslaught paused for a moment, and I felt a sense of confusion. It was as if the entity was puzzled by my resistance. Perhaps its previous victims had been overwhelmed too quickly to fight back. Taking advantage of its hesitation, I pushed deeper into the passageway, my hands scraping against rough stone. This area seemed older, less affected by the living light. I allowed myself a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was a way out after all. But then I heard it. A sound that chilled me to my core. My own voice, echoing from the cavern behind me. This defies all known biology. Bioluminescent organism exhibiting collective behavior and apparent responsiveness to external stimuli. The living light had absorbed my words, my observations. It was learning from me even now. I realized with dawning horror that every moment I spent in this underground realm, every thought I had, was potentially making it stronger, more knowledgeable. "I have to get out of here," I muttered, pressing on through the darkness. Not just for my own survival, but for everyone on the surface. If this thing ever escapes... I couldn't finish the thought. The implications were too terrifying to contemplate. An intelligent, ever-learning predator, capable of absorbing and utilizing the knowledge of its victims, unleashed upon the world above, As I ventured deeper into the unknown passageway, I carried with me the awful weight of my discovery. The living light was more than just a fascinating scientific phenomenon. It was a threat to all of humanity, and I was possibly the only person alive who knew of its existence. The fate of the world might very well rest on my ability to escape this luminous labyrinth and warn others of the horror that lurked beneath their feet. With renewed determination, I pressed on into the darkness, acutely aware that with every step, the living light was watching, waiting, and learning. Deeper into the cavern, I stumbled upon grisly evidence of those who'd come before. The narrow passageway I'd been following suddenly opened up into a vast chamber, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. Bones, both human and animal, jutted from the walls, partially absorbed into the fungal network. Some were ancient, others disturbingly fresh. The living light pulsed around them as if drawing sustenance from these grim trophies. "Oh God," I whispered, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "What happened here?" As if in response, the light intensified around a nearby cluster of remains. I approached cautiously, my scientific curiosity warring with my instinct for self-preservation. A human skull stared back at me, its eye socket still gleaming with that unholy light. As I examined it closer, I noticed something clutched in its bony fingers, a tattered notebook. With trembling hands, I carefully extracted the notebook. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, but much of the writing was still legible. I began to read aloud, my voice shaky. Day 3 of expedition. The sinkhole opened up beneath us without warning. Johnson and Martinez didn't make it. The fall. God, the fall seemed endless, and now we're trapped in this nightmare realm of living light. I paused, glancing around nervously. The cavern pulsed, as if listening intently to my words. Day 5, I continued. The light is alive. It's not just bioluminescence, it's intelligent. It reaches for us, tries to touch our minds. Sanchez screamed for hours yesterday before the light took him. I can still hear his voice echoing in my head. A chill ran down my spine as I read those words. I could almost hear the echoes of Sanchez's screams reverberating through the cavern. Day 7. It's learning from us. Every bit of knowledge, every memory it absorbs makes it stronger. I've seen it form shapes, tools, weapons. It's evolving before our eyes. God help us all if it ever reaches the surface. The living light swirled around me, pulsing with increased intensity. Was it reacting to the words I was reading? Or to the fear and despair emanating from me? Final entry, I read, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm the last one left. The others. The light took them all. I can feel it probing at my mind, trying to break through. I won't let it take me. I won't become part of this abomination. If anyone finds this, please, for the love of God, destroy this place. Burn it all. Don't let it escape. The entry ended abruptly, a long smear of what looked horribly like dried blood across the page. As I lowered the notebook, a chilling realization struck me. This underground forest wasn't just surviving, it was feeding. Not just on the physical bodies of its victims, but on their knowledge, their experiences, their very essence. You've been doing this for years, haven't you? I said aloud, addressing the living light directly. Decades, centuries. How many people have you consumed? The cavern pulsed, and suddenly I was assaulted by a barrage of images and sensations. Explorers from different eras, scientists, lost hikers, even what looked like indigenous people from centuries past. All had fallen victim to this luminous predator. I staggered back, overwhelmed by the onslaught. "Stop!" I cried out. "Get out of my head!" The visions ceased abruptly, leaving me gasping for breath. As my eyes refocused, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Carved into the cavern wall, partially obscured by the glowing fungal growth, were crude drawings. I approached cautiously, brushing away some of the luminescent tendrils to get a better look. The drawings depicted stick figures surrounded by wavy lines, clearly meant to represent the living light. Some of the figures were shown being absorbed into the light, while others fled in terror. "This is ancient," I murmured, tracing the faded lines with my finger. "These people knew about you. They tried to warn others, but their warnings had gone unheeded. How many generations had this thing been feeding, growing, evolving?" The implications were staggering. As I examined the skull once more, a horrifying thought occurred to me. "You keep them conscious, don't you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Even after you've absorbed them, they're still aware, still experiencing." The cavern seemed to pulse with a sort of malevolent glee, and I knew I'd hit upon the truth. This wasn't just consumption. It was eternal torment. Every victim became a part of this vast alien intelligence, their consciousness trapped within its luminous network. "That's why you're so eager to absorb us," I realized aloud. "It's not just about gaining knowledge. You feed on our fear, our suffering. It sustains you." The living light swirled around me, more agitated now. I had the distinct impression that it didn't like me uncovering its secrets. I backed away from the wall of bones, my mind reeling from the horror of what I'd discovered. This place wasn't just a threat to those who stumbled into it. It was a ticking time bomb. With each victim, it grew stronger, more knowledgeable. How long before it figured out a way to expand beyond this underground realm? "I have to stop you," I said, clenching my fists. "I have to find a way to destroy you, to free all those you've trapped." But even as I spoke, I felt the hopelessness of my situation. How could I, a lone geologist, hope to defeat an entity that had been consuming and evolving for centuries? The living light pulsed around me, and I could almost feel its amusement at my defiance. It had faced would-be heroes before, had absorbed their courage and determination along with their fear. As I stood there, surrounded by the grim remnants of those who'd come before, I realized the true nature of the nightmare I'd fallen into. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a battle for my very soul, and for the future of humanity itself. With renewed determination, I clutched the tattered notebook to my chest and pressed on deeper into the cavern. I had to find a way out, had to warn the world about what lurked beneath their feet. The echoes of the past urged me forward, the silent screams of countless victims pushing me to be the one who finally escaped this luminous hell. A shift in the air was my only warning. The gentle, pulsing glow that had surrounded me suddenly intensified, bathing everything in harsh, pulsating light. The ground beneath my feet began to undulate, and tendrils of luminescence shot towards me with terrifying speed. "No!" I shouted, stumbling backward. "Stay away from me!" But my words seemed to only excite the living light further. It surged forward, reaching for me with eager, grasping tendrils. Heart pounding, I fled deeper into the cavern, the light in hot pursuit. Every instinct screamed that if those tendrils caught me, I'd join the other poor souls embedded in the walls. The thought of my consciousness trapped for eternity in this alien network spurred me to run faster than I ever had before. As I raced through twisting tunnels, I could hear a sound building behind me. It started as a low hum but quickly grew into a cacophony of whispers and screams. The voices of previous victims, their final moments replayed in this awful chase. "Help us!" they seemed to cry. "Join us!" "Shut up!" I yelled over my shoulder, trying to block out the maddening chorus. "You're not real. You're just echoes." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. These weren't just recordings. They were the actual consciousnesses of those the light had absorbed, forced to participate in this twisted hunt. I ducked into a narrow side passage, hoping to lose my luminous pursuer. For a moment, the sounds faded, and I allowed myself to catch my breath. "Think, Ramirez," I muttered to myself. "There has to be a way out of this." As a geologist, I'd studied the formation of caves and sinkholes extensively. There had to be some natural law, some weakness I could exploit. But how do you fight something that defies all known science? My brief respite was shattered as tendrils of light began to seep into the passage, moved more slowly here, as if unsure of the terrain. An idea began to form in my mind. "You're not all-knowing, are you?" I said aloud.
You're limited by the experiences you've absorbed. You don't know every nook and cranny of this place. The light pulsed, almost angrily, and surged forward with renewed vigor. But now I had a plan. I waited until the last possible moment, then ducked under the reaching tendrils and sprinted back the way I'd come.
I could feel the confusion emanating from the living light. It hadn't expected this move, hadn't absorbed the knowledge of prey that fought back strategically. As I ran, I began to notice patterns in the cavern's layout. Certain areas seemed older, less affected by the fungal growth. These might be my best chance for finding a way out. "Come on," I panted. "There has to be an exit somewhere." But the living light was learning, adapting to my tactics. It split into multiple streams, trying to cut off my escape routes. I found myself dodging and weaving through an ever-tightening net of luminescence. "You want my knowledge?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the cavern. "Here's something for you to chew on. Entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. Everything breaks down eventually, even you." To my amazement, the light actually paused for a moment, as if processing this new information. I took advantage of its hesitation to dive into another narrow passage. As I ran, I continued to shout scientific principles, mathematical equations, anything I could think of that might confuse or distract my pursuer. It seemed to be working. The light's movements became more erratic, less coordinated. "That's right," I muttered. "Choke on some advanced physics, you glowing bastard." But my triumph was short-lived. As I rounded a corner, I found myself face to face with a solid wall of pulsing light. It had managed to get ahead of me, cutting off my escape. "No," I breathed, backing away. "No, no, no." The light surged forward, tendrils reaching for me eagerly. I could feel its excitement, its anticipation of absorbing a new mind, new knowledge. In desperation, I grabbed a loose rock from the cavern floor and hurled it at the wall of light. To my amazement, the rock passed through, disrupting the luminous barrier. "You're not solid," I realized aloud. "You're energy light. You can be scattered." With renewed hope, I began grabbing more rocks, throwing them in rapid succession. Each impact created a ripple in the living light, momentarily dispersing it. I used these brief openings to push forward, ignoring the burning sensation as tendrils of light brushed against my skin. It felt like my very essence was being pulled at, but I gritted my teeth and pressed on. "I will not become part of you," I growled, fighting through the pain. "I will not be another voice in your twisted chorus." As I battled my way through the barrier, I could sense the living light's frustration and rage. It wasn't used to prey that fought back so fiercely, that understood its nature well enough to exploit its weaknesses. Finally, I burst through the other side, collapsing to the ground as the wall of light tried to reform behind me. I was battered, exhausted, and my mind felt raw from the light's probing touches, but I was still free. As I lay there gasping for breath, I realized something that filled me with both hope and dread. The hunt had changed me. I was learning, adapting, just as the living light was. But unlike its previous victims, I was using that knowledge to fight back. "This isn't over," I said, pushing myself to my feet. "You hear me? I'm going to find a way out of here, and I'm going to make sure the world knows about you. Your days of feeding in the darkness are numbered." The cavern pulsed with an angry red light, and I knew the hunt was far from over. But for the first time since I'd fallen into this nightmare realm, I felt a glimmer of real hope. I had survived the first round, had learned valuable information about my enemy. Now, it was my turn to be the hunter. With grim determination, I set off deeper into the cavern, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. The living light may have home field advantage, but I had something it couldn't fully comprehend: the indomitable human spirit and the burning desire for freedom. The hunt had only just begun, and I was determined to be the one who finally escaped this luminous hell. As I raced through the twisting tunnels, my scientific mind fought against paralyzing fear. This ecosystem, as alien as it was, had to follow some natural laws. If I could understand its patterns, perhaps I could find a way out. I forced myself to observe, to analyze, even as I ran for my life. Think, Ramirez, I panted, ducking under a low-hanging stalactite. What do you know about bioluminescence? What about fungal networks? The living light pursued me relentlessly, its tendrils grasping at my heels. But as I ran, I began to notice something. The fungal network seemed to grow denser in certain areas. Could those be vital nodes? I skidded to a halt, pressing myself against a rock formation as I caught my breath. The living light swirled around me, probing but not yet attacking. It seemed curious. You want to learn, don't you? I said aloud, an idea forming. That's why you absorb your victims. You're constantly seeking new information. The light pulsed, almost as if in affirmation. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. Okay then, let's have a little science lesson, I said, forcing confidence into my voice. Did you know that fungi are more closely related to animals than to plants? They're part of the kingdom fungi, separate from both plants and animals. The tendrils of light paused their advance, seeming to process this information. I pressed on, my mind racing through years of scientific knowledge. And bioluminescence, that's what you're doing right now. It's a form of chemiluminescence. In most organisms, it involves a chemical called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase. But you're different, aren't you? Your light is tied to your consciousness somehow. As I spoke, I noticed the light's behavior changing. It swirled in complex patterns, almost as if it was trying to communicate. I realized with a start that it was mimicking the molecular structures I was describing. Fascinating, I breathed, momentarily forgetting my fear in the face of this unprecedented scientific discovery. You're not just absorbing information, you're actively processing and applying it in real time. But then I remembered the grim fate of those who had come before me, and my awe turned back to determination. I had to use this knowledge to escape, not just to satisfy my scientific curiosity. I began to move again, this time more slowly, observing my surroundings with renewed focus. The fungal network grew denser near water sources, I noticed, and there was a faint breeze. Did it hint at a connection to the surface? Okay, let's test a hypothesis, I muttered to myself. I picked up a small rock and tossed it towards one of the denser fungal clusters. The living light recoiled sharply, pulsing with what seemed like pain. Aha! I exclaimed. Those are your vital nodes, aren't they? Your weak points. The light surged towards me aggressively, apparently unhappy with this discovery. But I was ready. I ducked and rolled, using my newfound knowledge to avoid the densest clusters of fungi. As I ran, I continued to analyze my surroundings. The temperature was cooler near the ground, suggesting thermal currents. The rock formations showed signs of water erosion. All of these were clues, pieces of a puzzle that could lead to my escape. Come on, Ramirez, I urged myself. You're a scientist. This is just another problem to solve. A very dangerous, potentially lethal problem, but still just a problem. I found myself in a large chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness above. The living light hung back as if wary of this open space. And then I heard it, the faint sound of running water. Underground river, I breathed. That could be my way out. But as I moved toward the sound, the living light suddenly surged forward more aggressively than ever before. It formed a barrier between me and the direction of the water. You don't want me to go that way, do you? I said, a grim smile forming on my face. Which means that's exactly where I need to go. The light pulsed angrily, tendrils lashing out at me. But now I understood its patterns better. I dodged and weaved, using my knowledge of its weak points to push through. You know, I grunted as I fought my way forward. In most ecosystems, there's a balance. Predator and prey, life and death. But you've upset that balance, haven't you? You're too efficient a predator. You've consumed everything in your path. The living light swirled around me, and I sensed a sort of confusion emanating from it. These were concepts it hadn't encountered before. But that's your weakness, I continued, pushing harder. You've become dependent on outside input. Without new victims, new knowledge to absorb, you'll stagnate. Maybe even die out. I broke through the barrier of light, stumbling towards the sound of water. As I ran, I felt a shift in the air, a dampness, a freshness that I hadn't experienced since falling into this nightmare realm. "You're not invincible," I called out over my shoulder. "You're not all-knowing. You're just another organism, bound by the laws of nature like everything else. And nature always finds a way to restore balance." The living light's pursuit seemed to falter at these words. For the first time, I sensed something like fear emanating from it. It had never encountered prey that understood it so well, that could challenge its perceived omniscience. As I rounded a corner, I saw it, a swift-flowing underground river disappearing into a dark tunnel. My heart leapt with hope. This could be my way out. But I knew the living light wouldn't let me go easily. I turned to face it, standing my ground at the river's edge. "Here's one last lesson for you," I said, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "Humans are remarkably adaptable. We observe, we learn, we evolve, just like you. But we have something you don't. The will to challenge our own nature, to be more than just what our instincts tell us to be." With those words, I stepped backwards into the rushing water. The living light lunged for me, but it was too late. The current caught me, pulling me into the darkness of the tunnel. As I was swept away, I saw the tendrils of light reaching after me, pulsing with what seemed like frustration and loss. But I had done it. I had used knowledge as my weapon, science as my shield. Now, as the underground river carried me to an unknown destination, I clung to that hard-won knowledge. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that understanding of myself, of my environment, of the very nature of life itself, would be key to my survival. The darkness enveloped me, but for the first time since falling into this underground world, it wasn't filled with terror. Instead, it held the promise of discovery, of challenge, and just maybe, of escape. My strength was fading, my lungs burning as I pushed onwards. The underground river had carried me for what felt like miles, its icy waters sapping my energy with every passing moment. But I couldn't stop, couldn't rest. The living light was closing in, its tendrils brushing against my heels. "Keep going," I gasped to myself, my voice barely audible over the rush of water. "You're close. You have to be." The tunnel twisted and turned, plunging me into total darkness before opening into caverns where the familiar, eerie glow of the living light awaited. Each time I emerged into these illuminated chambers, the tendrils reached for me with increasing desperation. "You won't have me," I panted, kicking harder against the current. "I won't be part of your network." But my defiance was weakening along with my body. How much longer could I keep this up? The cold was seeping into my bones, my muscles screaming in protest with every movement. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, I spotted something ahead, a sliver of true daylight. My heart leapt with a surge of hope and adrenaline. "There!" I cried out, reinvigorated. "That's it, that's the way out." But the living light had seen it too. The cavern around me pulsed with an angry red glow, and suddenly the water itself seemed to come alive with luminescence. Tendrils of light shot through the current, wrapping around my ankles, trying to drag me back. "No," I shouted, thrashing against their grip. "Let go of me." I could feel the light probing at my mind, more intensely than ever before. Images flashed before my eyes, memories of my life on the surface, knowledge I'd accumulated over years of study. The living light was making one last, desperate attempt to absorb everything I knew before I could escape. "Get out of my head," I growled, focusing all my willpower on pushing back against the mental invasion. As I fought this mental battle, my body was engaged in a physical one. The current was strong, pulling me towards the exit, but the tendrils of light held fast. I was caught in a tug-of-war between two forces of nature, my body the rope in this cosmic game. "Come on, Ramirez," I urged myself. "You didn't come this far to fail now. Think, use that big brain of yours." And then it hit me. The living light was energy, a form of bioluminescence. And what affects bioluminescence? Light itself. With one hand, I fumbled for the waterproof flashlight I'd miraculously managed to hold on to throughout this ordeal. My fingers, numb from the cold, finally found the switch. "Let's see how you like this," I muttered, and clicked it on. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The tendrils of light recoiled as if burned, releasing their grip on my legs. The cavern pulsed with what seemed like pain and confusion. Taking advantage of the light's momentary retreat, I swam with all my might towards the exit. The opening was small, barely large enough for a person to fit through, but it was my only chance. As I lunged for the opening, I felt the living light make one last grab for me. Its tendrils wrapped around my ankles, trying to drag me back into the depths. "No!" I cried out, clawing at the rocks around the exit. "I won't let you take me." With one final, desperate surge, I pulled myself free, feeling the tendrils grasp at my ankles. I could almost hear the anguished cry of the living light as its prey escaped its grasp. Gasping, I clawed my way to the surface, collapsing onto the forest floor above. The warm sunlight on my skin felt like a miracle after so long in the cold, dark caverns. I lay there trembling, as birdsong and dappled sunlight slowly brought me back to reality, but the horrors I'd witnessed were seared into my mind. I knew that beneath our feet in the darkness we rarely consider, an alien world thrives and hungers. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself to my feet. My clothes were torn and sodden, my body battered and bruised. But I was alive. I had escaped. "I made it," I whispered, tears of relief streaming down my face. I actually made it. But as the initial euphoria of escape faded, a grim determination took its place. I couldn't just walk away from this. The living light was still down there, still hungry, still waiting for its next victim. "I have to warn people," I said aloud, my voice hoarse but resolute. "I have to make sure no one else falls into that nightmare." I looked back at the small opening I'd emerged from. It seemed so innocuous, just another feature of the forest floor. How many other entrances to that underground hell were scattered throughout these woods? "This isn't over," I promised, both to myself and to the entity lurking below. "I'll be back, and next time, I won't be alone. We'll find a way to stop you, to contain you." As I turned to make my way back to civilization, I felt a mix of emotions washing over me. Relief at my escape, fear of what I'd experienced, and a burning curiosity to understand more about the living light and its underground realm. I live now with the terrifying knowledge that the boundary between our world and that one is paper thin. But I also live with a sense of purpose. As a scientist, as a survivor, it's my duty to shed light on this dark secret, to protect others from falling prey to the horrors that lurk beneath. The race against time isn't over. In many ways, it's just beginning. But now, armed with knowledge and experience, I'm ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead. The living light may have lost this round, but the battle for survival, for humanity itself, is far from over. Now let's move on to the next dark story. Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. The text message from Jake lit up my phone, its cheerful ping a stark contrast to the dread that would soon consume us all. "Hey guys, camping trip this weekend in the Catskills. Who's in?" I stared at the screen, an inexplicable chill running down my spine. Something about the idea unsettled me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Maybe it was the looming deadline at work, or the argument I'd had with my girlfriend earlier that week. Either way, I hesitated before responding. "Sounds great," Sarah chimed in immediately. "I've been dying to try out my new tent." "Count me in," Mike added. "I'll bring the beer." Their enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself typing out a response before I could second-guess myself. Sure, why not? Could use a break from the city. As soon as I hit send, a wave of unease washed over me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just nerves. Little did I know that this simple act of acceptance would be the first step on our path to terror. The week dragged on, each day bringing us closer to our ill-fated expedition. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the growing sense of foreboding that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. By Friday, as I packed my bag, the feeling had intensified to a persistent ache in the pit of my stomach. We met at Jake's place early Saturday morning. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for us with grasping fingers. Jake's excitement was palpable as he loaded the last of the gear into his beat-up Subaru. "This is going to be epic, guys," he grinned, slamming the trunk shut. "I found this amazing spot off the beaten path. Real secluded, you know?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "How secluded are we talking, Jake?" "I'd like to make it back alive, thanks." We all laughed, but there was an undercurrent of nervous energy in the sound. Jake waved off her concern. "Don't worry, I've got it all mapped out. Trust me, it'll be worth it." As we piled into the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. The drive up to the Catskills was filled with upbeat chatter and sing-alongs to cheesy 80s hits, but beneath it all, a current of tension thrummed like a live wire. Hours later, we turned off the main road onto a narrow, winding trail that disappeared into the dense forest. The trees pressed in close on either side, their branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers. The laughter in the car died down, replaced by an uneasy silence. Jake?" Mike leaned forward from the back seat. "You sure this is the right way?" Jake's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but his voice was steady. "Yeah, just a little further. The guy at the ranger station said it's pretty remote, but the views are incredible." I exchanged a glance with Sarah in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with growing apprehension. I wanted to say something reassuring, but the words stuck in my throat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we emerged into a small clearing. Jake killed the engine, and for a moment we all sat in silence, taking in our surroundings. The clearing was ringed by towering pines, their uppermost branches swaying gently in a breeze we couldn't feel. In the center was a fire pit, ringed with stones that seemed oddly out of place, too smooth, too perfectly arranged. As we stepped out of the car, the forest fell eerily silent. No bird song, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just a heavy, oppressive quiet that seemed to press down on us from all sides. "Well," Jake said, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Here we are? What do you think?" We murmured non-committal responses, each of us too caught up in our own unease to muster much enthusiasm. As we began to unpack the car and set up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Later, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across our campsite, we gathered around the fire pit. Jake struck a match, and the flames leapt to life with an eagerness that made me flinch. "Perfect night for some ghost stories, don't you think?" Sarah said, trying to inject some levity into the atmosphere. Mike nodded, cracking open a beer. "Yeah, why not? Who wants to go first?" As we settled in around the fire, the shadows seemed to deepen, the darkness of the forest pressing in around us. The flames danced wildly, casting grotesque, shifting patterns across our faces. I opened my mouth to suggest that maybe ghost stories weren't such a good idea, but before I could speak, Sarah launched into a tale about a creature called the Whispering Wendigo. With each word she spoke, the fire seemed to grow brighter, hungrier. The shadows at the edge of our circle writhed and twisted, taking on shapes that made my heart race. And as Sarah's story reached its chilling climax, a sound drifted from the depths of the forest. A whisper, so faint I thought I must have imagined it. But as I looked around at my friends' faces, I saw the same dawning horror reflected in their eyes. We all heard it, and in that moment, I knew with sickening certainty that by accepting Jake's invitation, we had set in motion events that would forever change our lives. The campfire stories we were about to tell would become all too real, and this secluded clearing in the Catskills would become the stage for our own personal nightmare. As Mike cleared his throat to begin the next tale, I silently prayed for dawn, unaware that the true horrors of our night had only just begun. Sarah's voice quivered slightly as she began her story, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames of our campfire. "Have you guys ever heard of the Whispering Wendigo?" she asked, her gaze darting nervously to the dark forest beyond our circle of light. We shook our heads, drawn in despite the growing unease that seemed to permeate the very air around us. Sarah took a deep breath and continued. "Legend has it that deep in these very woods there lurks a creature so ancient and terrible that even the Native Americans feared to speak its name. They called it the Whispering Wendigo." As Sarah spoke, the fire seemed to dim, the shadows growing longer and more menacing. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. "The Wendigo was once a man," Sarah went on, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "A tribal chief who turned to cannibalism during a harsh winter. With each human life he consumed, he grew more monstrous, more insatiable." Mike laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "Come on, Sarah, it's just a story, right?" Sarah ignored him, her eyes taking on a glassy, faraway look. "They say the Wendigo still roams these forests, eternally hungry. It lures its prey with whispers, promises of warmth, of safety, of home. But follow those whispers, and you'll never be seen again." As if on cue, a gust of wind whipped through our campsite, causing the fire to sputter and dance wildly. We all jumped, startled by the sudden movement. "Jesus, Sarah," Jake muttered, his face pale in the flickering light. "Way to freak us all out." I forced a laugh, trying to dispel the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over us. "Yeah, great story. Really scary. Who wants marshmallows?" But as I reached for the bag, a sound drifted from the depths of the forest, so faint that at first I thought I must have imagined it. A whisper, barely audible, yet unmistakably there. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, my hand frozen midway to the marshmallow bag. The others looked at me, their eyes wide with growing fear. Slowly, they nodded. "It's just the wind," Mike said, but his voice lacked conviction. We sat in tense silence, straining our ears. For a long moment, all we could hear was the crackling of the fire and our own rapid breathing. Then it came again, a soft, sibilant whisper that seemed to caress our ears with icy fingers. Come to us." Sarah let out a strangled gasp, scrambling backward so quickly she nearly fell off her log. "No," she whimpered. "No, it can't be real. It's just a story. I made it up." Jake stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. "All right. Very funny. Which one of you is doing this? Mike? Is this your idea of a joke?" Mike shook his head vehemently. "It's not me, man. I swear." The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, surrounding us, pressing in on us from all sides. Warmth, safety, home. I found myself standing, though I didn't remember getting up. My feet seemed to move of their own accord, taking a step toward the darkness beyond our campfire. "Stop!" Sarah's scream snapped me out of my trance. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't listen to it. Don't go." The others were on their feet now, too, huddled together in a tight circle. The whispers had become a cacophony, a maddening chorus that threatened to drown out all rational thought. "What's happening?" Mike shouted over the noise. "This isn't possible." But we all knew, with a bone-deep certainty that defied logic, that it was happening. Sarah's story had somehow come to life, unleashing a horror that was all too real. Jake fumbled for his flashlight, clicking it on with shaking hands. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees at the edge of our clearing. For a moment, all we could see were shadows and mist. Then, something moved. A figure, tall and emaciated, with antlers that scraped the low-hanging branches. Its skin was a sickly, pallid gray, stretched tight over an impossibly gaunt frame. And its eyes, God, its eyes, glowed with an unholy, ravenous light. The Wendigo. Sarah's scream pierced the night, snapping us out of our paralysis. We ran, stumbling over roots and rocks, our only thought to get away from the abomination that Sarah's words had conjured into being. As we crashed through the underbrush, the whispers followed us, growing more frantic, more hungry with each passing second. I could hear the creature moving behind us, branches snapping under its inhuman weight. "This can't be real," I gasped as we ran. "Stories don't come true, they can't." But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. Something had changed when Sarah began her tale. The very fabric of reality had shifted, turning our campfire stories into nightmares made flesh. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out, finally collapsing in a small hollow, hidden from view by a fallen tree. As we huddled there, trying to catch our breath, a terrible realization dawned on me. "Guys," I whispered, my voice hoarse with fear. "If Sarah's story came true, what about the others? What about all the tales we were going to tell tonight?" The look of horror that passed over my friends' faces told me they had come to the same chilling conclusion. Our night of scary stories had only just begun, and with each tale we told, we were unleashing new terrors into the world. As the Wendigo's whispers echoed through the forest, growing ever closer, I knew that our fight for survival had only just begun. And the most terrifying part? We had no one to blame but ourselves. We huddled in that hollow for what felt like hours, our hearts pounding in our chests, ears straining for any sign of the Wendigo. The forest around us had fallen into an eerie silence, broken only by our ragged breathing and the occasional snap of a twig that sent us into fresh paroxysms of terror. Finally, Mike spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I think it's gone. For now," Sarah added, her face ghostly pale in the dim moonlight filtering through the trees. Slowly, cautiously, we emerged from our hiding place. The night air felt thick, oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was saturated with our fear. "We need to get out of here," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Back to the car. We can make it if we stick together." We nodded, too shaken to argue. As we began to pick our way through the underbrush, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking deeper into a trap of our own making. That's when Mike, perhaps in an attempt to lighten the mood, made the fateful decision to share his story. "You guys want to hear about the bloodthirsty backpacker?" he asked, forcing a weak chuckle. "Mike, no," I started to say, but it was too late. He had already begun. "There's a tale about these woods," Mike said as we walked, his voice gaining strength as he fell into the rhythm of the story. "They say there's a hiker who roams the trails, always looking for fellow campers. He seems friendly at first, offering to share his fire, his food, but once you let your guard down..." A twig snapped loudly somewhere to our left. We all froze, straining our eyes in the darkness. "Mike, shut up," Sarah hissed. "We don't need any more stories coming to life tonight." But Mike, caught up in his tale, continued in a hushed voice. "They say he carries a wicked hunting knife curved like a claw, and when the moon is high, he..." "Hello there, fellow campers." The cheerful voice cut through the night like a gunshot. We whirled around to see a figure emerging from the shadows, backpack slung over one shoulder, a friendly smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Looks like you folks could use some help," the stranger said, taking a step closer. "I've got a fire going just over that ridge. Why don't you join me?" We stood frozen, the awful truth dawning on us all at once. Mike's story, like Sarah's before it, had manifested in reality. The bloodthirsty backpacker stood before us, as real and terrible as the Wendigo we'd narrowly escaped. Thank you, but we really need to be going," Jake stammered, backing away slowly. The backpacker's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "Oh, but I insist," he said, reaching behind his back. "I've got plenty to share." The moonlight glinted off the curved blade of his hunting knife as he brought it into view. "Run!" I screamed, and we scattered into the woods, the maniacal laughter of the bloodthirsty backpacker echoing behind us. As we ran, dodging trees and leaping over fallen logs, the full horror of our situation crashed down upon me. It wasn't just Sarah's story. It wasn't just Mike's. Every tale we told, every horror we conjured from our imaginations, was coming to life in these godforsaken woods. We regrouped at the base of a large oak tree, all of us panting and wild-eyed. "What the hell is happening?" Jake gasped, leaning against the trunk for support. "It's the stories," I said, the words tumbling out as the realization solidified in my mind. Everything we're saying, everything we're telling, it's all coming true. Sarah's eyes widened in horror. "But how? Why?" "The campsite," Mike whispered, his face ashen. "Those stones around the fire pit, they looked old, ancient even." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the odd, too-perfect arrangement of those stones. What if we camped on some kind of sacred ground? A place where stories have power. The others stared at me, the implications of my words sinking in. We had unknowingly tapped into something primal, something that blurred the lines between fiction and reality. And with each word we spoke, each tale we spun, we were unleashing new horrors into the world. "We have to stop talking," Jake said urgently. "No more stories. No more." A blood-curdling shriek cut through the night, causing us all to jump. It was followed by another and another, a chorus of inhuman wails that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Oh God," Sarah whimpered. "The Catskill Banshees." It was going to be my next story. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Sarah, how many of these creatures did you say there were in your story?" She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. "A whole clan, dozens of them." As if in response, the forest erupted with screams, each more terrifying than the last. We huddled closer together, the realization of our predicament weighing on us like a physical force. "What do we do?" Mike asked, his voice cracking with fear. I looked at each of my friends in turn, seeing my own terror reflected in their eyes. We were trapped in a nightmare of our own creation, surrounded by the very monsters we had given life to with our words. "We need to find a way to end these stories," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "To close the door we've opened." Trying to catch our breath. For a moment all was silent save for our ragged breathing. Then Mike spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Guys, look at this." We followed his gaze to the far wall of the structure. In the dim moonlight filtering through the gaps in the stones, we could make out faint markings etched into the rock face. Symbols and pictographs, weathered by time, but still discernible. Jake fumbled for his flashlight, clicking it on with shaking hands. The beam illuminated the wall, revealing the full extent of the ancient artwork. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and growing horror. The etchings told a story. Crude figures gathered around a central fire, their mouths open in what could only be interpreted as storytelling. But surrounding these figures were monstrous shapes, creatures with too many limbs, with gaping maws, with forms that defied natural law. It's us, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. This is what's happening to us right now. Jake traced his fingers over the symbols, his brow furrowed in concentration. These markings, they're not all the same age. Some are newer, added over time. Like a warning, Mike added, his voice hollow, left by others who came here before us. As we studied the wall, piecing together the horrifying truth of our situation, a glint of something metallic caught my eye. Wedged into a crack near the base of the wall was a small, tarnished plaque. With trembling hands, I pried it loose, brushing away years of accumulated grime. The inscription, though faded, was still legible. Attention, campers. This area is a protected Native American heritage site. Please respect the sacred ground and refrain from disturbing any artifacts. Tribal elders warn of ancient spirits that guard this land. The weight of our mistake crashed down upon us. We had not just stumbled onto any campsite. We had unwittingly trespassed on hallowed ground, a place where the veil between our world and the spirit realm was thin. We never should have come here, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. We never should have told those stories. Jake slammed his fist against the wall in frustration. How were we supposed to know? There were no signs, no warnings at the trailhead. Maybe there were, I said quietly, and we just didn't see them. Or maybe we were meant to come here. The others turned to look at me, confusion and fear etched on their faces. What do you mean? Mike asked. I gestured to the wall of pictographs. Look at the patterns. The stories repeat, but they're never exactly the same. It's like this place draws people in, makes them tell stories, and then brings those stories to life, Sarah finished, her voice barely audible. A heavy silence fell over us as the implications of this sank in. We weren't just fighting for our lives. We were caught in an ancient cycle, one that had claimed countless victims before us. Suddenly, a low rumble shook the ground beneath our feet. Dust and small pebbles rained down from the ceiling of our shelter. What was that? Jake asked, his flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. Before anyone could answer, the rumbling intensified. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the forest, drowning out even the banshee's wails. Sarah's face went deathly pale. The hungry earth, she whispered. It was going to be my finale. A story about the very ground coming alive and devouring everything in its path. As if in response to her words, the floor beneath us began to shift and writhe. Cracks appeared in the stone, widening into gaping maws filled with writhing roots that looked disturbingly like tongues. Out, I screamed. Everyone out now. We scrambled through the opening, barely making it out before the entire structure collapsed in on itself, swallowed by the very earth it had stood upon for centuries. As we stood there, watching the ground continue to heave and churn, the full gravity of our situation hit home. We were trapped on ancient, sacred land that was actively trying to destroy us, surrounded by the very horrors we had given life to with our words. What do we do now? Mike asked, his voice trembling. I looked at each of my friends in turn, seeing my own terror and desperation reflected in their eyes. We find a way to end this, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We find a way to close the door we've opened. As another roar shook the forest, and the wails of the banshees drew ever closer, we set off deeper into the woods, searching for a solution to the nightmare we had unleashed. The ancient ground beneath our feet pulsed with malevolent energy, a constant reminder that in this place, our stories had the power to shape reality itself, and that power could very well be the death of us all. We stumbled through the writhing forest, the ground beneath our feet no longer stable, but a living, breathing entity with murderous intent. The hungry earth, as Sarah had named it in her unspoken story, seemed determined to swallow us whole. "Watch out!" Jake yelled, yanking Mike back just as the ground opened up where he had been standing a moment before. "Thanks," Mike gasped, his face ashen. "I can't believe this is happening. How many more horrors did we conjure up?" As if in answer to his question, a blood-curdling howl pierced the night air. It was followed by another, and another, until a chorus of inhuman cries surrounded us. Sarah's eyes widened in recognition. "The phantom of the forest," she whispered. "It was going to be my story after the hungry earth, a spectral wolf pack that hunts those who disturb their territory." "Damn it, Sarah," Jake snapped. "How many stories did you have planned?" "I'm sorry," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know this would happen. None of us did." I held up my hands, trying to calm everyone down. "Fighting won't help. We need to focus on—" My words were cut short as a ghostly form burst through the underbrush. It was a wolf, but like no wolf I'd ever seen. Its body was translucent, glowing with an eerie blue light. Its eyes were empty sockets, and its jaws were filled with teeth that seemed too long, too sharp for any natural creature. "Run!" I screamed, and we took off deeper into the forest. The phantom wolves gave chase, their howls growing louder, closer with each passing second. We ducked under low-hanging branches and leaped over fallen logs, our lungs burning with exertion. Suddenly, Mike tripped, crying out as he hit the ground hard. I skidded to a stop, turning back to help him. "Go!" he shouted, waving me away. "Save yourself!" But I couldn't leave him. As I reached down to help Mike up, I saw the lead phantom wolf leap, its jaws opening impossibly wide. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact. That never came. I opened my eyes to see the wolf frozen in midair, as if caught in an invisible net. All around us, the forest had gone eerily still. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the air in front of us began to shimmer and distort. A figure stepped through what seemed to be a tear in reality itself. An old woman, her skin wrinkled like ancient parchment, her eyes milky white. "The Catskill Witch," Jake breathed, recognition and fear mingling in his voice. The old woman's lips curved into a mirthless smile. "So," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "You're the ones who've been making such a ruckus in my woods." We stood frozen, unable to speak, as the witch circled us slowly, her unseeing eyes somehow taking in every detail. "Foolish children," she muttered, "playing with forces beyond your understanding. Did you think your words held no power here?" Finally, I found my voice. "Please," I begged. "We didn't know, we didn't mean to—" "Intentions matter little in this place," the witch cut me off. "Only actions. And your actions have torn the veil between worlds, releasing horrors that should have remained in the realm of imagination." Mike struggled to his feet, wincing in pain. "Can you help us? Can you make it stop?" The witch's laughter was like breaking glass. "Stop it? Oh no, child. The wheels are already in motion. The stories have been told. They must now play out to their conclusion." "But we'll die," Sarah cried out. "Perhaps," the witch said, her tone indifferent. "Or perhaps you'll find a way to survive your own tales. Either way, it's not my concern." "Then why are you here?" Jake demanded. "Why show yourself to us at all?" The witch's milky eyes seemed to focus on Jake, and I saw him flinch under her gaze. "To warn you," she said, "and to give you a choice." She waved her hand, and suddenly we were no longer in the forest. We stood atop a high cliff, looking down at the wilderness spread out below us. In the distance, we could see our campsite, the fire still burning. "The horrors you've unleashed are spreading," the witch said. "Soon they will reach beyond these woods, bringing terror to the world beyond. Unless what?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Unless you return to where it all began," she replied. "Back to your campfire. There you must finish what you started. Complete your tales, face your creations. Only then can balance be restored. "But that's suicide," Mike exclaimed. The witch shrugged. "Perhaps, but it's the only way to contain the chaos you've unleashed. The choice is yours." And with that, she vanished, leaving us alone on the cliff top. The forest below seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, the horrors we'd created roaming freely through the trees. We looked at each other, the weight of the witch's words hanging heavy in the air. Return to the campsite and face certain danger, or try to escape and doom who knows how many innocent lives. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice small and frightened. I took a deep breath, knowing that whatever we decided, our night of terror was far from over. The stories we'd begun to tell around that campfire were demanding an ending, and we were the only ones who could provide it. "We go back," I said finally, my voice stronger than I felt. "We finish this, whatever it takes." As my friends nodded in grim agreement, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap of our own making. But what choice did we have? The witch was right. We had started this, and now we had to end it. With heavy hearts and trembling legs, we began our descent back into the nightmare forest, knowing that the true horrors of our night had only just begun. The journey back to our campsite was a harrowing odyssey through a landscape warped by our own imaginations. Every shadow concealed a potential threat. Every rustle in the underbrush sent our hearts racing. The hungry earth continued to shift beneath our feet, while the howls of the phantom wolves echoed in the distance. As we stumbled into the clearing where our adventure had begun, I felt a chill run down my spine. Our campfire still burned, casting an eerie glow over the ancient stones that encircled it. It was as if time had stood still here, waiting for our return. "Okay," Jake said, his voice trembling slightly. "We're back. Now what?" We huddled together, our eyes darting nervously around the perimeter of the clearing. The horrors we had unleashed were out there watching, waiting. "The witch said we have to finish what we started," Sarah whispered. "Complete our tales." Mike shook his head vehemently. "Are you crazy? Every story we tell comes true. If we keep going, we're just going to make things worse." I closed my eyes, trying to think. There had to be a solution, some way out of this nightmare. Suddenly, an idea struck me. "Wait," I said, my eyes snapping open. What if we don't tell new stories? What if we retell the ones we've already shared but change the endings?" The others looked at me, confusion and hope warring on their faces. "Think about it," I continued, warming to the idea. "If our words have the power to create these horrors, maybe they also have the power to destroy them. We could craft tales of banishment, of defeat, of light conquering darkness." Sarah's eyes widened in understanding. Like writing a happy ending to a horror story?" I nodded eagerly. "Exactly. We rewrite the rules, change the narrative. It's our only chance." Jake ran a hand through his hair, looking skeptical. "I don't know, man. It seems risky. What if it backfires?" "Do we have any other choice?" I asked quietly. A moment of heavy silence fell over us, broken only by the crackling of the campfire and the distant, unsettling sounds of the forest. Finally, Mike spoke up. "I'm in. It's better than just waiting here to die." Sarah and Jake nodded their agreement, and we settled around the fire, our faces grim with determination. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Who wants to go first?" Sarah raised her hand tentatively. "I'll start with the Whispering Wendigo." We all tensed, half expecting the creature to materialize at the mention of its name. But the clearing remained still. Sarah's voice shook as she began her tale. The Wendigo stalked the forests, hungry and relentless. But as it approached a group of campers, something unexpected happened. The campers stood their ground, showing no fear. Their courage and unity created a light so bright, so pure, that the Wendigo couldn't bear it. With a final, agonized howl, the creature dissolved into mist, banished from this realm forever. As Sarah finished speaking, a wind whipped through the clearing. We held our breath, waiting. In the distance, we heard a faint, mournful cry that faded into nothingness. Did it work? Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could answer, a blood-curdling scream split the air. The bloodthirsty backpacker burst into the clearing, his curved knife glinting in the firelight. "Mike!" I shouted. "It's your turn! Quickly!" Mike's face was pale, but his voice was steady as he launched into his revised tale. The bloodthirsty backpacker raised his knife, but as he did, he caught sight of his reflection in the blade. In that moment, he saw himself for what he truly was, not a monster, but a lost soul consumed by pain and loneliness. The knife slipped from his grasp, and with it, his hunger for violence. He fell to his knees, weeping as years of rage and bitterness melted away. The backpacker froze mid-stride, his face contorting in confusion. The knife slipped from his fingers, disappearing before it hit the ground. With a wail of anguish that was somehow more human than monstrous, the figure of the backpacker shimmered and faded from view. A spark of hope ignited in my chest. It was working. We were rewriting the rules, changing our fate with the power of our words. But our victory was short-lived. The ground beneath us began to tremble and heave, reminding us that the hungry earth was still very much alive. "Sarah," I said urgently, "the hungry earth. It's your story. You need to end it." Sarah nodded, her face set with determination. She closed her eyes, gathering her thoughts, and then began to speak. The earth roared in hunger, but as it did, it felt something it had never experienced before. The weight of the lives it supported. The trees, the animals, the people, all were part of a delicate balance. In that moment of realization, the earth's hunger transformed into a desire to nurture and protect. Its rage subsided, and the forest returned to its natural state of harmony. The shaking subsided gradually, the ground settling beneath our feet. We looked at each other, hardly daring to believe it. "We're doing it," Jake said, a note of awe in his voice. "We're actually changing things." But even as he spoke, a chorus of otherworldly wails reminded us that our task was far from over. The Catskill Banshees, the Phantom Wolves, and who knew what other horrors still lurked in the darkness, waiting for their stories to be concluded. As we steeled ourselves for the challenges ahead, I couldn't shake a nagging doubt. We were playing with forces we didn't fully understand, rewriting the very fabric of reality with our words. What if we made a mistake? What if, in our desperation to survive, we created something even worse? The night was far from over, and I knew that before dawn broke, we would be tested in ways we could scarcely imagine. Our desperate plan was working, but at what cost? And would we all make it to the final page of this terrifying story we had unwittingly written ourselves into? With trembling voices and racing hearts, we continued our task, hoping against hope that we could undo the horrors we had unleashed before it was too late. As the night wore on, we continued our desperate attempt to rewrite the horrors we had unleashed. One by one, the monsters born from our imagination were banished or transformed. The Phantom Wolves faded into mist. The Catskill Banshees' wails turned to soft, sorrowful songs that drifted away on the wind. But with each story we concluded, I could feel a change in the air. A building tension, as if the very fabric of reality was being stretched to its breaking point. Finally, as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, we faced our last and most terrifying creation, the Catskill Witch herself. She wasn't part of our original stories, Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of storytelling. How can we banish something we didn't create? Jake shook his head, his eyes wild with exhaustion and fear. Maybe we did create her. Maybe she's been here all along, waiting for someone to give her form with their words. As if summoned by our discussion, the air before us shimmered, and the witch materialized. Her milky eyes seemed to bore into each of us in turn, her thin lips curved in a mirthless smile. "So," she rasped, "you've managed to undo much of the chaos you've wrought. I'm almost impressed." "We've finished our tales," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's over. You have to let us go." The witch's laughter was like breaking glass. "Oh, foolish child. Did you really think it would be that simple? You've torn the veil between worlds, unleashed powers beyond your comprehension. Such actions demand balance." A chill ran down my spine at her words. "What do you mean, balance?" The witch's grin widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "A sacrifice, of course. One of you must stay behind, become part of the forest forever. Only then will the scales be truly balanced." Horror washed over me as I realized the implications of her words. We had come so far, fought so hard, only to be faced with an impossible choice at the end. "No," Mike said firmly. "We're not leaving anyone behind. There has to be another way." The witch's eyes flashed with anger. "There is no other way. One stays, or you all perish." As my friends began to argue, desperately trying to find a solution, a calm settled over me. I knew what I had to do. "I'll stay," I said quietly. The others fell silent, turning to stare at me in shock. "No," Sarah choked out, tears streaming down her face. "We can't let you do this." I smiled sadly at my friends. It has to be me. I was the one who pushed us to keep telling stories even when we realized something was wrong. This is my responsibility. Jake grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. "There has to be another way. We can keep fighting, keep telling stories until..." "Until what?" I interrupted gently. "Until we make things even worse? No, this ends now." I turned to face the witch, squaring my shoulders. "I volunteer as the sacrifice. Let my friends go and I'll stay behind." The witch studied me for a long moment, her head tilted to one side like a curious bird. "Very well," she said finally. "Your sacrifice is accepted." "Wait!" Sarah cried out. What if we tell one last story? A story about all of us escaping, about the forest returning to normal without a sacrifice." The witch's laugh was cruel. "You still don't understand, do you? Your words have power here, yes, but only because I allow it. This is my domain, and in the end, my will is law." I felt a tugging sensation, as if hooks were embedded in my very soul, pulling me towards the witch. I turned to my friends one last time. "Go," I said, forcing a smile. "Live your lives, and please, no more campfire stories, okay?" As my friends were suddenly pushed back by an invisible force, I heard their cries of anguish and protest. But their voices grew fainter as the witch and I began to fade from view. "A noble sacrifice," the witch murmured, almost approvingly. "Perhaps there's hope for your kind after all." As the world around me began to blur and shift, I felt my body changing, merging with the forest itself. Use that power wisely, and never forget the cost of careless words. And so my tale comes to an end. I am the forest now, and the forest is me. A living story, a cautionary tale, a reminder of the power of imagination and the responsibility that comes with it. Let those who venture into these woods take heed, for here, more than anywhere else, words have weight, and stories can change the very fabric of reality.